Our story begins with two pairs of feet stomping hard in an alley. And in this alley, a woman was desperately fleeing from those who were following her for some purpose. The two followers were not joking around despite their mischievous smiles. Cornered, the young woman held onto her bag while waiting for someone to help her, until a voice emerged ordering the wrongdoers to stop, and the two looked back curious. One of them asked who the kid was that was approaching while eating a candy bar, while the other said he had nothing to see there. But the boy was not intimidated and suggested that the two flee if they didn't want to die. The wrongdoers did not take the kid seriously while the young woman looked around, perhaps searching for an escape. The boy then removed the bandage from his neck, and numerous ants began to emerge as if they had been freed from a burrow. One of the attackers shouted for the boy to get out of there when his body was drenched in something hot and red. And when he turned to see what it was, his companion was on the ground, at least half of him. He looked back, trying to understand what had just happened, and his expression changed from malice to shock. A large insect that made noises with its sharp mandibles spoke in a guttural and threatening voice, interrupting my meal again. The man then let out a scream and ran away from the creature that the defenseless woman had just transformed into. The boy watched everything as his body began to darken, overtaken by the ants that were emerging from his neck. And when he faced the grotesque creature in front of him, he shouted, "Black ant." Some mosquitoes hovered over the scene as if they were witnesses, and a man in a white suit observed the alley from behind the safety barriers, while another man, dressed in a uniform that labeled him as the Insect Reaper, documented the crime scene with his camera. The team found traces of a man without his parts and struggled to understand how a fight against insects had caused such chaos. Something caught the attention of the man in the suit as he pondered the information from the only survivor that there had been a boy at the scene. Then he noticed some ants eating the remnants of a candy bar thrown on the ground. The man took out a cigarette while another mosquito curiously flew behind him. With a calm expression, he lit his cigarette and blew smoke at the insect that seemed to be staring at him. The details of the incident were still very loose, and the existence of a boy in that alley left him quite intrigued. The flying monsters resembled insects, and the first case was recorded in 2005. A kind of giant mosquito seen walking through the streets of the city. They feed on humans, just like our friend with a bandage on his neck attacks a bag of chocolate. However, the most concerning aspect was that these beings lived among humans, and perhaps that was the worry of the boy looking out the window in his classroom. They were known as insectors. A student read aloud to the others a warning for those who still considered the fact a mere urban legend. And quite impressed, she continued that the insectors existed, and that if anyone suspected someone, they should look for those responsible for the pamphlet, which were none other than the insect reapers, and the teacher thanked Ara for the reading in front of the class. The man commented that the police were linking the crime in Maiman the night before to the insectors and therefore asked the students not to stay on the street after school. Upon returning to her seat, Arajo was asked by Sejinbang if she lived in Maiman, to which the girl confirmed and asked her friend to come back home with her. At another desk, a boy asked if his friend believed in the insectors and received a yes in response, informing that there was one in the classroom, referring to the young man with a bandage on his neck who was devouring a bag of chocolate. Our protagonist, Mizanga, then started to laugh. The teacher cut the fun short by informing them that they should do their homework as it would count for their grade for the term. And he asked Arajo to collect the students' assignments after class, and surely many had forgotten to do it. The bell rang and someone called the class representative. It was the two playful students who approached Ara asking her not to turn in the homework, but the girl wanted to know why she wouldn't. They deduced that only she had done the assignment, so they proposed that they all fail together, but she had no intention of doing that. The students tried to threaten Ara while her friend defended her, and our human insect merely observed from afar, until someone approached the arguing students and handed them some sheets of paper, leaving everyone perplexed. It was our protagonist who reached out to Arajo, informing her that it was his homework. The girl looked at Mizong proudly and thanked him while taking the papers. He returned to his desk and something on it caught his attention. A small ant was walking across his notebook as if it were bringing him a message. The two stared at each other for a while, and Mizong seemed to understand what she wanted. Then he stretched out his finger towards the little creature, perhaps to greet it. But suddenly, someone violently placed their foot on the boy's desk and crushed the ant, which now lay between the pages of the notebook. Mizong merely stared at the student who was upset that he had submitted his homework, and the bully continued to rant that the protagonist should know when to keep quiet, but Mizong didn't move a muscle on his face. Not satisfied, the student also mentioned the bandage on Mizong's neck, asking if he was hiding a hickey. This made the other student laugh at the possibility of Mizong having a girlfriend, and while he remained silent, Arajo asked her friend what a hickey was. Sejinbang replied that it was a mark left after a strong kiss on the neck, which left Arajo perplexed. The bullies then went after Mizong to remove his bandage, and Era tried to restore order in the class by shouting for them to stop. But the student didn't hesitate and began to pull at one of the bandage's ends, announcing that a big revelation was coming. Then, with the bandage in hand, they were stunned by what they saw. Indeed, Mizong didn't have a hickey. Instead, he had a hole in his neck that the boys judged to be a wart. This revelation made the big guy more aggressive as he grabbed our protagonist by the neck, asking why he was covering a simple wart. But suddenly, Something startled the aggressive student with wide eyes. For a cautious ant began to emerge from Mizong's neck. It quickly descended down our boy's body and hid among his clothes. The student let out an indignant scream at what he had just witnessed. Then he released Mizong and fell to the ground, shouting that an ant had come out of his wart. Sejin asked if Era liked our insect boy, but despite it being evident on her face, the girl denied it. However, after thinking for a moment, she listed the qualities she saw in Mizong, almost without realizing that she was crumpling the boy's homework. Ara went to the teacher's room, and the man noticed that only she and our protagonist had done the homework. Then he let out a curse that made the girl jump in surprise as a reaction. As punishment, the old man informed the girl that only Mizong and she could go home while the other students had to stay and clean the incineration area. Arajo thought that the bullies would be irritated by the news and considered staying to help Sejin, especially out of fear of going home alone. It was then that she realized that Mizong also lived in Naiman, and so she thought to ask the boy to go back together. She walked down the hallway and came across our boy adjusting the bandage in front of the mirror, then called out to him. Mizong looked at her as the girl approached, commenting on the teacher's decision for the other students who hadn't done the homework, and she continued that only the two of them could leave and hopefully asked the boy if he would like to accompany her back home. However, Mizong apologized and informed her that he already had plans for after school, which left our class representative somewhat embarrassed. In the incinerator, the class bullies were outraged by the punishment, ranting against the teacher in every corner. Sejin tried to encourage the boys to complete the punishment and go home, but they questioned leaving without doing the assignment, to which Era replied no. It was then that the girl noticed that her friend was with them in the room, and curious, she asked what Era was doing there, to which the class representative answered the obvious, even though Sejin wanted to know why she hadn't gone home. Arajo, with tears in her eyes, replied that she would wait for Sejin, who, upon noticing her friends crying, became worried, especially when she learned that Mizong had rejected her. But she almost shouted at the news, and Arajo asked her to speak quietly. Sejin commented that it was her friend's chance to have a boyfriend, even thinking he was cold and stupid. However, Era defended the boy, saying he was a good kid and that her friend didn't know him well. Sejin was upset to learn that her friend would let her go home alone, but Era justified that she had the right, just like the bullies who felt entitled to sneak away. And when they walked, they decided to talk about the ant that had come out of our protagonist's neck, while the students swept the ground in the piece of her headphones. The boys were not very pleased with Mizong's presence in the class, and to avoid giving up on studying, they decided to teach our boy a lesson. It was a relief to imagine the boy getting a beating, but something caught the attention of one of the bullies. And in the dim light of that incinerator, something with 4 lights as bright as headlights appeared before them, saying something like, "Homework." Suddenly, there was a quick noise, and the strong student felt his face bathed in ketchup while he remained motionless. The student who was sweeping, happily listening to her headphones, heard nothing of what had just happened. And suddenly, the student's coconut rolled to her broom as if in an improvised hockey game. The girl noticed what it was and let out a deafening scream that alerted the other students on the other side of the yard. Another scream, and she ran away in panic from what she had just witnessed, warning everyone to run because there was an insect in the area. The creature's leg trembled with its steps, until it revealed itself to the others in its horrendous form with a sharp mouth in the middle of its face, mumbling the phrase, "homework." 2 students tried to escape to the side of the creature that was moving forward, but they couldn't avoid its attack as the sauce gushed out, and the others watched the scene in shock. Arajo and Sejin Bang, wide-eyed, saw their friends fleeing amidst that chaos. They began to run with the others, and the creature charged at high speed. Another crash, and more students were knocked down during the escape as if they were pins on a bowling lane. However, the girls did not give up and continued with all their strength. The creature's steps grew increasingly intense as they fled, until Sejin felt the weight of a hand on her shoulders, and when she looked back, she witnessed another friend being attacked. But in reality, he only used her as a boost to take the lead. Then the girl fell backward, hitting her head against a stone embedded in the ground, and Arajo only had time to stop and scream her friend's name. She returned to help Sejin and knelt beside her, trying to revive her. Then the heavy steps of the creature intensified while Arajo, in tears, did not want to abandon her friend, accepting her fate. The beast roared again, "Homework," and stood before the kneeling girl who had little to do. That was when courage took hold of the class representative, and her leadership instinct made her stand up and order the creature to leave. Then a mouth began to form on the horrendous creature, which tried to give a warning to the young leader. A pair of glasses appeared on the creature's face, creating a familiar shape, and thus it warned Arajo that it had sent the girl home. With wide eyes, Arajo realized that the monster was her teacher. However, without hesitation, the insect raised its arms like a hammer and shouted, "Why didn't you listen to me?" And it brought its heavy hands down on the students mercilessly. Then suddenly, before the monster's limbs could touch the victims, numerous ants appeared in a trail and blocked the attack, sending its arms flying away. And Arajo, who awaited the impact like Christ the Redeemer facing Guanabara, seemed unable to believe what she saw. She simply followed that swarm of little black dots everywhere, responsible for her survival. And suddenly, there was a loud bang, and a man in black armor appeared on the ground in a fighting stance, surrounded by ants as if they were part of him. He then faced those present, who could see his eyes shining behind that closed and intimidating helmet. The masked man was ready for battle, while Urajo, unconscious, had no idea what was happening around her. He protected her in his arms when the insect teacher called him by the name of Black Ant, the destroyer of kin. The supposed hero stood tall before the creature, which insisted on saying that it knew his reputation. Then it wanted to know why the ant defeated those of his own kind and acted as a protector of humans. The creature seemed indignant at the boy's actions, trying to convince him that the insects were superior to any form of life. Then the ant, without hesitation, delivered a punch to the creature that caused almost a thunderous sound due to the power of the blow. And the insect teacher flew backward until crashing against the wall, leaving it almost in ruins. A hero insect turned to the girls to get them out of that hostile place in front of so many students who succumbed to the attack. He laid the girls down on the ground while responding that he did not act that way to protect humans, and he firmly clenched his fists, stating that this was not a fight, but rather a hunt for food. The round creatures still sprawled out seemed incredulous to learn that the giant ant not only defeated other insectoids, but also ate them. Then the motivated and furious professor rose again to face our hero, warning that it would not be so easy to defeat him, and that he would avenge his relatives. The insectoid transformed into a rock ball with headlights and attacked Black Ant as if it were a meteor on a collision course. It struck his chest directly, but the hero managed to balance his body and plant his legs on the ground. However, the impact was so intense that he slid backward, holding the ball professor until he destroyed the fence surrounding the incineration yard. The hero fell from the blow, perhaps not imagining the creature's immense strength, which boasted that it did not need arms to defeat a mere ant. Then it called him insignificant and jumped so high that the ant seemed to be facing the moon, blocking the sun in broad daylight. And when it reached a considerable height, it let gravity take over, shouting that it would crush that insect. The creature increased its speed as it descended and activated its war cry, "Homework," while the hero, still somewhat dazed, watched the enemy approach, until the fierce blow from the professor came, almost burying the ant in the ground due to the force of its rocky body. Black Ant had little to do in that situation, so the professor unleashed several attacks on him, which perhaps only did not crush him because of his armor. The big creature moved away again in the air, revealing the hero completely dazed inside the crater formed by the blows. The ball insectoid, still in the air, faced its equal on the ground and threatened that it would beat its opponent. And for a fraction of a second, as if talking to his little ants, the hero whispered, "Get ready." Then the professor descended again with ferocity, shouting that it was time to put an end to the traitor of the species. Black Ant only had time to look up and give the order, "Run," until another impact from the ball insectoid hit the ground, causing a tremor that sent stones flying in all directions. As the smoke dissipated at the attack site, it was possible to see the crimson liquid mixing with the sandy terrain. And the professor, noticing the result, showed satisfaction at having subdued his enemy, but something he did not understand occurred before his eyes. Black Ant had not been defeated, and beneath the creature, he had already pierced its rocks with his spear-like appendage. The professor insectoid was injured and wondered as the pain consumed him, how he had not anticipated that counterattack. The ant stood up and focused in front of the disgusting creature, ordered again the phrase, "Run." Then a boy's leg with a high-top sneaker began to emerge from behind the humanoid carcass of that insectoid armor. Quickly, the suit began to disintegrate, giving way to another leg like the first, and his arm emitted black spots that gradually became an immense claw with the ants that had left their legs and clustered around there. The professor, who had no escape left, shouted for the hero to finish it quickly, and Black Ant then fulfilled his wish. There was a thunderous sound, and the mercy blow was delivered as the insectoid was thrown backward. Black Ant, now with his boy legs exposed, propelled himself to meet the opponent before he fell and caught him in midair. Then he let out a shrill scream and hurled the professor, smashing his head against the ground. Before succumbing, the dying man still tried to ask how the boy could have so much power, but he felt his body being lifted again by the hero, who seemed to want a bit more fun. The ant let out a piercing scream, showing his fangs, while the professor shook his legs, begging for mercy. But the protective insectoid seemed determined and sank his claws into the cavities of the rocky insectoid. The professor then, before being eliminated, screamed in the midst of pain that the student should not forget to turn in his homework, and the ant finished off the man, crushing him without hesitation. The rocks turned to crumbs, leaving only the professor's glasses to tell the tale. Thus, the hero left the yard, celebrating with his little ants for the success. Gradually, he began to shed his insectoid form and returned to being the young Miss Own. The boy walked away from the site when suddenly another insectoid form appeared among the trees. He stopped abruptly upon noticing it, but did not turn his gaze, and the creature, also clad in armor and a helmet, watched him. The mysterious insectoid remained still while feeling the black spots that followed Mission, contrasting with the gold of its armor. In the incineration yard, only the professor's glasses remained from the battle, and the insect reapers isolated the area to investigate while controlling the curiosity of students and reporters trying to take photos of the incident. Meanwhile, the man in the white suit, alongside a type of warrior carrying an axe on his back, discussed how they hadn't arrived in time for the battle, The axe-wielding man, who also wore a mask, crouched down in front of the yard and judged that from the mess, a fight between insectors had occurred. Turning to the man in the white suit who was smoking his cigarette, he inquired about what reason could have motivated them to fight each other. That's when the smoker remembered that the survivor of the alley attack had told him that a boy saved them from that insector woman asking them to flee. And so he began to explain that the insectors fought to protect, but was interrupted by one of his agents informing him that one of the attacked students had woken up. He looked on with curiosity when he was informed that, according to the witness, a man in black attire had saved her. As they walked, a student all dirty and dazed was telling the press how he managed to contact the Reapers, feeling like the savior of the nation. Excited, he commented that he had managed to take some photos of the attack and decided to show them to those present. However, upon opening his phone, he realized that the photos were not clear. One of the agents complained about the local cameras not working and considered sending the reporters away as the suited chief and the warrior approached. The man then replied that the press should stay as it was time for people to believe that the insectors were not just an urban legend. However, the masked warrior deduced that for the public to believe the facts would be like forcing them to swallow the whole story. That's when they noticed Arajo on the phone with her mother, reassuring her that she would return home safely. And the girl, with her imperative manner, put on the oxygen mask, alerting the chief of the Reapers that he should not smoke on school premises. Thus, the man apologized, extinguishing his cigarette, and explained that it was a mosquito repellent. As the day progressed, the man in the white suit, despite being moved by the situation, wanted to know from Era what had happened at the site after all. And completely traumatized, the girl recounted that after the monster teacher attacked the students, a man in black attire appeared. Curious about the witness, both the chief and the warrior wanted to know why the girl believed that the savior in black was indeed a man. Then Arajo replied that she couldn't remember much due to fainting, but everything indicated that he resembled a man and not a monster. The girl leaned against the car, her expression more relieved as she recalled the figure in black, and added that he had protected everyone. The chief, who was paying attention to the young woman's account, also asked if there was any student who was not participating in the cleanup of the yard. And the girl replied that there was one student, so the man wanted to know a little more about the absent boy. When night fell, Mizong went home and found his grandmother, who seemed happy to see him return. The charismatic old lady smiled and informed the boy that dinner was served. She mentioned that she had prepared his favorite dishes, and when he looked at the table, he indeed witnessed a hearty feast waiting for him. Mizong stared at all that abundance, trying to find a way not to disappoint his grandmother, commented that he wasn't feeling hungry that day. The woman even choked, taking a step back at her grandson's response. Then the boy looked at her as she asked, affectionately yet worried, if he had done that again. She began to inspect her grandson, asking if he had been hurt, but Mizong simply said he wasn't hungry, which made the woman feel more at ease, and quite affectionately, she asked the boy not to worry about her, suggesting that he go rest. Mizong then turned to his grandmother before entering his room and asked her to save the food as he would eat in the morning. The old lady watched her grandson close the bedroom door, and with tears in her eyes, she prayed to God to take care of him, understanding that the boy had a very heavy burden. She judged that the world was very cruel as a trail of ants climbed the wall of the building toward Mizong's room. The newspaper announced the news of the day on television, informing about the tragedy that occurred at the school in Guro, a district of Seoul, where several students were struck down by an insector. On the TV in that dark room, the reporter explained about the teacher, who had become a monster, demystifying the idea that insectors were just a legend. As the ants approached Mizong lying on the bed, an interview responded that he never imagined that about the teacher for a simple homework assignment. And the boy, stagnant, let the ants return to their hole in his neck, while on TV people wished for the end of all insectors. Thus, our protagonist began to close his eyes and fell asleep with his co-sisters back to what seemed like an internal anthill. In a suspicious building with connections to child abduction, 3 police officers were investigating, advancing floor by floor. They continued to climb until they heard a noise, and the operation leader signaled with his hand for them to wait. They then leaned against the wall, alert to the sound with weapons in hand. And the anxious leader crept along the wall until he approached a room without a door. Then his expression changed strangely with what he had just witnessed. For inside the room, there were cocoons hanging with children who cried and begged for their mothers. Outside the building, a white jeep waited patiently, and inside the vehicle was the man in a white suit accompanied by 2 more agents with anxious expressions. The driver, named Ta, commented in a dull manner that he hated waiting and suggested that they execute the rescue mission themselves. However, the passenger named Sam reminded him that the company was under the government and therefore the police had jurisdiction when an insector was found. Until suddenly, the onboard command of the car with the symbol of the insect reapers began to emit a radio frequency, and the message that came with a plea for help put Ta in a good mood in front of a reluctant Sam, even in the presence of the boss. Ted touched his partner's shoulder upon noticing his nervousness, but the man beside him, making a strange noise, explained that it was just his silent way. Then the boss in the white suit, named Pio, ordered the agents to stop joking and told them to follow the call while taking his repellent cigarette out of his pocket. Meanwhile, a blade was cutting something with speed, and in this way, the police were rescuing the children hanging in those disgusting cocoons, until one of the soldiers asked if they shouldn't wait for the insect reapers, and the leader replied that they couldn't waste time or the children could die. Then the officer noticed that one of the children was not responding to stimuli, and the leader shouted for him to break the cocoon because the victims needed air. The man began to tear the wrapping, and the face of the desperate child emerged from the webs while he tried to calm her, informing her that she was safe. The knife made a cut in another cocoon, and the soldier tearing the webs asked if the child inside was okay. Then a dragged voice came from the wrapping, asking what the man was doing. Suddenly, something shot out at the officer from inside the cocoon, hitting him squarely in the forehead, and the leader only had time to look to the side. It was then that the cocoon in question began to dissolve, revealing a huge insect that flapped its wings rapidly. The dragged voice again asked what the police were doing with its babies, and the leader was startled by what he saw while holding one of the children in his arms. The creature was a massive insector with a spear-shaped stinger in place of a nose, and fiercely, while flapping its wings, it demanded an answer to its question. Suddenly, another officer entered the room calling for his captain, and without hesitation, he unloaded the magazine of his rifle against the monster in front of him. But the creature was swift and charged at the soldier, taking him down with its spear stinger. The captain's eyes widened in disbelief that the monster was faster than a bullet, and he was certain it was an insector when the creature came toward him to eliminate him. But before it could strike, something hit its face, saving the captain from what would have been his certain death. However, the shot had only split the monster's stinger in half, while the man in disbelief felt the projectile pass close to his ear, coming through the window behind him, revealing a tall tower outside. And it was from this tower that Sam, with exquisite precision, fired the shot that saved the man. The agent reloaded his rifle, preparing for the next attack, lamenting his failure to destroy it on the first shot due to the creature's speed. The insector was indignant for having been shot, and thinking that the captain had fired, flew up at him with all the fury in its being. And suddenly, a baton was placed between the monster and the man, once again saving his life. This time it was Tav who stepped forward to help the police and questioned whether the insectoid was a boy due to his way of speaking, and when the creature asked who he was, the agent identified himself as an insect reaper and struck the monster's head squarely with his weapon, just like a bat hitting a baseball. Then the flying creature crashed against the wall, scoring a touchdown. Pio entered the scene with his cigarette in his mouth and asked the captain to take the child and leave as quickly as possible. The insectoid regained its composure and charged furiously, determined not to let the men take its baby so easily. Suddenly, Pio, who had not shown his abilities until now, exhaled a puff that resembled a volcano erupting. With the place filled with smoke, the insectoid began to feel its body reacting like a mosquito hit by insecticide. The calm chief explained to the monster that the smoke had already taken over its nervous system and therefore asked the creature to cooperate and tell what it did with the children. Dazed by the poison, the insectoid ripped off its stinger and replied that it was looking for the black ant and not its larvae. Ted did not seem to like being called a larva, but Pio, in turn, showed more interest in the name the creature mentioned. That was when the creature revealed its trump card and, unwilling to talk, shot dozens of arrows that shot out from its face towards its enemies. Pio, noticing the attack, inhaled his cigarette with all the breath he had and blew forcefully towards the rapidly approaching arrows. Ta also did not fall behind and skillfully blocked the arrows coming in his direction with his baton. The creature used this attack as a distraction, but before it could reach the window, the chief alerted Sam in the tower that the creature was escaping. But only a scream of pain was heard over Pio's radio, and without any shots fired by the man in the tower, he asked what happened. But Sam was injured by the monster's arrows and informed that it was very fast. The agents inside the building were frustrated, and Ta commented that Jin would be disappointed in him, so they decided to leave the location. After the incident with the insectoids, the school was closed for a week, and flowers were placed on the desks in memory of the students who lost their lives during the attack. And while Su Yang received a medal for being the first person to report an insectoid, Arjo saw on social media that the boy did not deserve such pomp, and she thought of Sejin in the hospital, who had been ignoring her since the surgery he had on his head. She was so angry at the boy while scrolling through her feed that she didn't even notice two children playing with insect masks in front of her. Then the boy approached Ara and tried to scare her, but she just stared at him. And suddenly, she punched the kid in the face, correcting him never to do something like that again. Desperate, he ran away, warning that he would tell his mother, but she informed him that she would do that first. Disillusioned, the girl complained on the park bench about having to take care of her younger brother due to the school closure, and that he had no idea what she had faced. Then she heard another scare behind her and turned around impatiently to reprimand Azio, her younger brother with the insect mask. But she did not expect the little boy to be playing with Mizan, who was staring blankly while eating something as always. She called out to the boy, who looked at her while sucking on his popsicle. Thus, the three sat on the park bench, and the siblings thanked our protagonist for the ice cream he gave them. Asio was relishing his popsicle, but Arajo looked curiously at Mizong, who was devouring the popsicles uncontrollably. Then she remembered Pio's question about the only student who was not in the yard for cleanup on the day of the attack, and how he approached her while she was recovering, leaning against the ambulance wanting details about the boy. However, Arajo felt uncomfortable with the conversation with the chief of the Reapers, and so she decided to ask Mizong if anything different had happened to him on the day of the attack, and the boy, who was devouring his popsicle, replied that nothing had happened. She felt relieved while her brother picked up the sticks with our Ant Boy to build a little castle. But Asio ended up getting distracted by a soccer ball that rolled near his construction and decided to go play with his friend, informing his sister. Mizong started biting the stick, and Arajo noticed that he was making a strange noise. She watched his behavior and wondered what was wrong with the boy, imagining that maybe he was still hungry. The two sat on the park bench just watching the children without saying anything, until the kid's ball ended up on the other side of the fence outside the park, and Asio told his sister he was going to get it. The boys crawled under the open fence to look for the ball that had fallen among the bushes. Arajo called her brother, scolding him for disobeying her, but Mizong got up from the bench asking the children to wait for them to help. The girl, feeling embarrassed, said it wasn't necessary because she would go there, but our boy was undeterred and continued walking toward the kids. Mizong crossed the fence and stood in the middle of the woods looking for the children. Then something caught his attention in front of him. Azir's little friend was in front of him with a ball in hand and a grasshopper mask staring at him. The boy then turned to Mizong and asked, "Hey you, what the hell was that?" Inside the park, Asio was with Arajo, and when asked about the ball, the boy informed that Mizong had asked him to come back. Meanwhile, the little friend with the ball was talking to Mizong, full of slang, claiming he had the right over the situation and asked if our boy was one of them. The kid explained that he had led the other into an ambush, but Mizong had interrupted, then mentioned he was in a bad mood because of the trouble with the Reapers the day before. In a corrective tone, judging that Mizong was a rookie, he told him not to mess up his hunt again, but our protagonist already had his hand on the bandage. Thus, the insect boy with the grasshopper mask could witness our hero's ants acting their dark and heavy tone. He then widened his eyes behind the mask when the hero paraphrased him about messing up his hunt. Suddenly, Mizong's armor began to take shape on his body as he said that the insect in child form was talking a lot of nonsense. The grasshopper mask pointed at our hero, astonished by what he had just seen. Then he was overcome by a rage that made him burst the ball in his hand and shouted, "Black ant, you relative killer." The insect began to laugh in a challenging tone, even with the ants crawling on his body, and said he was looking for our hero. Black Ant was in his full suit, and the child insect revealed that the man was the talk of the town for eating his kind. But with him, it would be different. The boy grew angrier and reminded the ant about the laws governing the court of insects, and thus believed he would earn a lot of gold by defeating the traitor. Then he transformed into his original monster form and charged at Black Ant with his stinger, aiming to join the apex of the insects. He unleashed a red beam that seemed to make the hero burst like a birthday balloon. However, the impact only left part of his helmet destroyed, and thus the ant followed his opponent with Mizong's eyes on display. The insect, which had a mosquito form, flew high and targeted our ant with an ocular shot. The black ant remained still while the monster flew around him quickly, threatening him with each pass. But that buzzing was starting to annoy our hero, who scratched his head, realizing that the insect was a loudmouth. That's when suddenly the ant ordered the creature to shut up and caught him in midair with his hands, slamming him against the ground mercilessly. The monster felt the blow as his head was pressed against the ground, and the hero showed no signs of letting him out of there unscathed. Arajo was speechless at what she saw as Missing returned to the park, but his face showed a little dirt. And so when she noticed, the girl quickly tried to clean him up to hide the traces of the battle. Asio, in his innocence, asked if they had found the ball, and Missing calmly lied that yes, and that the little friend had gone home. Then, with the situation resolved, the little brother announced that he had cleaned up all of Missing's trash, but Arajo commented that the boy had only done that to get more ice cream. It was then that the girl realized that Missing's expression had changed, and while he and Asio negotiated for more ice creams, she was sure that our boy could smile too. Arajo asked, holding the bag with the ice creams, if they could really keep them all, and Missing replied with a cheerful yes. He commented that he was no longer hungry, wondering why that was, right folks? However, a gust of wind made Arajo look curiously to the side, and the leaves of the trees behind the park's fence rustled continuously. Meanwhile, in the middle of the woods, there was a crash on the carcass of the mosquito insect that lay among the vegetation. After a week without classes, the school reopened its doors, and the students walked towards it for a new phase after the incident. Missing was walking alone while some students passing by chatted casually. They commented on missing breakfast and also the outings they had during the forced vacation. Then, when they noticed Missing behind them, they decided to stop talking as if they were ignoring the boy. In the school corridor, Arajo, who was holding one of the flower branches for the memorial, looked indignant. There was a notice on the wall about the closure of her class, and the students would be reassigned to other classes due to the incident. Then she noticed that her name was in class 5, and luckily her friends Sejin and Mizion would also be in the same class. But what upset Arajo was the fact that she would no longer be a class representative. Thus began the first day of class in the new class 5, and Arajo, feeling down, scrolled through her phone while the other students took their seats. The girl looked desolate as she fiddled with her phone because all the messages she sent to Sejin were ignored. Then, feeling quite bored with the situation, she couldn't believe she ended up in a class she thought was filled with idiots. One of the boys was fawning over Soo-young, wanting to know details about the day of the attack, and the boy recounted it as if he had been a great hero of the day, which made Era furious. A blonde girl sitting next to Arajo also seemed uncomfortable with what she was hearing. Then she stood up from her desk while our girl curiously followed the tall girl with her eyes. The girl walked towards the group of students listening to Soo-young's nonsense and delivered a front kick to the boy's stomach without hesitation. On the ground, he wanted to know why she did that while being stared at with disdain by his aggressor. Showing very little patience, the blonde girl named Yeojin Lee told the celebrity to stop talking nonsense in front of her. With that, one of the boys listening to the ramblings informed that they would remain quiet, and Soo-young was left speechless by the nickname the girl had as the class bully. Arajo assumed that Sejin would have loved to see that situation while the other students shrank back like dogs, seeing their alpha male pass by. Then suddenly, the bully who was about to leave the room came face to face with our protagonist entering, and they stared at each other. Yeojin stood at the door waiting for Mizong to move out of her way, but the boy with the bandage on his neck didn't look like he was going to yield. Thus, they brushed past each other as one entered and the other exited, but without friction. As Mizong walked under the gaze of the others, he heard someone call him and ask why he had taken so long. It was Arajo waving at him as if inviting him to sit with her. He then went over to the girl, and when he took his backpack off to sit down, Arajo told him that Yeojin was the class leader. She also mentioned that she had taught Soo-young the lesson while the boy tried to look surprised and took a package from his bag. Arajo seemed a bit more excited about the idea of the new class, and Miseong listened to her attentively while opening his cookie package. Then he did what he loved most: eat. During the math class, the teacher pointed to a calculation on the board, warning that that material would be on the next test, and our students paid attention to everything the man explained. Until suddenly, Miseong's stomach growled loudly, and Arajo promptly looked in his direction. Noticing the boy's hunger, she invited him to have a snack together later, and Miseong ended up agreeing. The teacher showed another calculation on the board, but this time informed that that material would not be on the test. It was then that a buzzing awakened our protagonist's senses, and he could almost identify its form in his mind. And thus he was sure it was an insect that by the sound couldn't be very far from there. The bell for recess rang, and Arajo turned to Miseong, calling him to have a snack. However, she realized that the boy was no longer by her side and assumed he must have been very hungry indeed. Miseong, almost parkouring, jumped over the school wall and ran as fast as he could for his hunt. Meanwhile, Tao wondered where the mosquito insect from the building could be, and Chief Pio considered that it might be hiding. As the two walked, he speculated that the creature might be dead and conjectured that they might not be the only ones fighting against the insects. The two were talking, and as they turned the corner, surprisingly, Miseong was running in the opposite direction in pursuit of his meal, and thus he ended up bumping into Pio, who was not expecting the impact. Miseong simply ignored the agents and continued running while Ta didn't know whether to curse the kid or try to help his superior. However, Pio simply turned on his heels and suggested they leave the kid alone. Tae, who was still watching Miseong disappear in the distance, deduced that he was skipping class as if he spoke with the voice of experience. In the teacher's lounge, the agents from the Reapers were in front of Arajo to ask her more questions about the absent boy on the day of the incident. She then commented that the boy might have gone home because he was very hungry, and Tae, who was sipping a coffee, inquired about the possibility that the student was the one who bumped into the boss while they were walking toward the school. Pio then handed a Reaper's card to Era and asked her to give it to our hungry friend as soon as she saw him again. While she looked at the card, the two agents left the school heading to the hospital where Sam was recovering from the last confrontation. Arajo read the card, intrigued to realize that the man in the white suit was the leader of the exterminator squad of insectors. In a place that looked like an abandoned factory, there was an insector in the shape of a dragonfly ready to attack. He was attentively watching the darkness of the factory, following the noise that was coming in his direction, until an insect leg appeared against the light. And suddenly, from the shadows emerged the black ant, completing his transformation process. The monster saw our hero while gliding with his wings, calculating his movements. He landed with a dull thud and showed his sharp claws that emitted a golden light. The black ant was not intimidated, continuing his steps, and the creature cracked its neck like a boxer preparing for the first round. Our hero wasted no time and charged at the gnarled creature with speed, but his strike was blocked by the monster's golden claw. It then turned and counterattacked, delivering a double punch with its lower legs to our ant's chest. The hero slid back with his guard open, and the insector saw there an opportunity to charge with everything. But this time, it was the black ant who blocked the strike with his left fist. The human dragonfly slid back and began to crack his bones as if he were enjoying the clash. And the black ant noticed that his opponent had something strange in his movements. The flying insector looked around as if sensing the presence of something, and subtly, a little ant appeared behind him, descending on a thin thread. Our hero opened his hand, and hundreds of ants appeared like a cloud, and that was a strategy he wanted to use. He then made a movement that propelled that ant hill toward his opponent. The creature was touched by the little ones but remained still with a laughing expression. His face was almost completely covered by the insects, making it hard to see his facial expression. And suddenly, several silver threads like webs began to appear on the monster's arms, coming from above with the ants walking over them. It was when the creature looked up and saw them near the ceiling that the hero made a noise as if he knew his plan wouldn't work. And so all the threads were cut by the opponent, who continued to crack his neck as if it were easier than stealing candy from a child. But then suddenly, he toppled over like a puppet without a master. And our hero walked up to him and held those threads with curiosity. But something strange happened with the fallen enemy. He turned his neck to the black ant, showing his devilish smile, and then opened his mouth, revealing an unpleasant surprise. A kind of grenade between his teeth was activated and emitted light at 4 different points. Our protagonist only had time to notice the flash in front of his face, followed by a massive explosion. And amidst that blast, 2 insectors approached the location through the thick smoke. The black ant was down with various parts of his suit destroyed when he heard a satisfied voice regarding the incident. And when our hero looked into the smoke, someone called him a relative killer. Then the 2 insectors revealed themselves, and one of them, wearing golden armor, placed his feet on the hero and commented ironically on his disadvantaged position. The insector in golden armor felt confident while subjugating the ant, who remained unresponsive, and asked if he had dealt with the flyer. But our hero said nothing, trying to regain his strength. Meanwhile, the second monster, which looked more like an android, approached and said that all the chaos created by our protagonist was being an inconvenience for them. And with his bazooka-shaped arm, he reinforced that he was having to deal with complaints from customers looking for fresh meat. Then he pointed the gun at Formiga and declared that he should pay for what he did. But the other Instatora made a face that showed she disagreed with the judgment. And before the robot monster could fire its shot, it lunged forward to deliver a powerful kick to our hero's face, which automatically dislodged the helmet from his body. The ants began to dissipate where a head once existed, and the blow was so strong that it chipped the pillar. The golden Instatora found it strange that Formiga had an empty head while analyzing the damage. But suddenly, the android insider shouted, "Silk, above you." And our boy, who only had the gauntlets of his ant suit, came crashing down in a hammer position to attack the Silk enemy. Thus, he struck the Insitora's head squarely, causing her to fall forward with the force of the blow. Misung touched the ground and quickly propelled his body to attack the second Insitor, leaving no chance for defense. He then unleashed a flurry of punches like a meteor against the opponent. However, the robotic Insitor withstood the attacks and balanced itself, activating its bazooka to counterattack. The weapon fired a kind of rocket that exploded, hitting our hero. But Mission blocked it with his gauntlets and then delivered another right cross. But he was halted by some blue wires before his fist could touch the opponent's face. The robot Insider stared at the punch that almost hit him when a determined voice said, "That's enough." And Mission saw his arms trapped by Silk's thread as if they were shiny webs, and the Instatora commented that despite being intelligent, the boy had acted recklessly. She was sure of her victory and thus threatened Formiga with fury that he would wish he had never become human. That's when she began to spin like a spool, rewinding its thread, and Mission needed to find a way to free himself from those webs. But the boy looked back, and upon realizing he couldn't move, the Instatora advanced toward him and delivered a spinning kick to his face. Mizung still tried to defend himself, but the blow was so strong that his expression of pain was clear and he fell once again. Our boy knelt down and suddenly felt the heat of the bazooka kiss his face, powerless to move. The robotic Insitor activated the shot against Mizung, who was practically defeated. He widened his eyes because he knew he only had 1,000th of a second to act before the weapon was fired. And suddenly he shouted almost in despair, "Run!" That's when his suit, which was outside his body, began to disintegrate in response to his call. The bazooka was loaded and hot like the mouth of a dragon as the ants forming Misong's suit rushed toward the boy swiftly. The robotic Insitor aimed its weapon at our hero and, understanding that the hunt was over, released the shot that produced a massive explosion. The shot caused enormous damage to the factory, leaving the pillar completely destroyed and consumed by fire. But the weapon was aimed upward with a stick directing its aim, and thus a voice warned that fireworks were punishable in that district. It was Todd who had arrived at the scene and prevented the robotic Insitor from hitting Mizong, who was completely defenseless. The agent, still holding his stick, looked at the monster and asked sarcastically if the insect's used leaves as currency. Then the creature jumped back, evading the blow launched by the new opponent as if it recognized his strength, and it posed next to its partner, who was watching everything attentively. Tech took a guard position and, looking at all those Insitors gathered, deduced that they were making a huge mess. Then Pio approached slowly, ironically informing that he couldn't let this pass while pulling his cigarette from his pocket. He took the opportunity to light it in the flames produced by the explosion, and he looked at the destroyed building, questioning if the creatures took them for fools. Our protagonist said nothing as he tried to recover, and Tae, who was swinging his stick among the insiders, commented that he was already fed up with this. It was then that Pio faced everyone with an air of superiority and threatened, saying it was time to show who was the boss. The robotic creature, which would not give up so easily, pulled a grenade from its bazooka, and the Reaper ages widened their eyes when they realized it was a bomb. Then the monster threw the device to the ground, producing an immense cloud of smoke, and thus the insiders left the area flying as they understood that they were at a disadvantage. Ta shouted that their fleeing in such a manner was a tremendous injustice, and so the boss wanted to know if the company could provide them with a helicopter. Frustrated, the stick-wielding agent asked what they would do with our boy, and Pio knew he had many questions for the Black Ant. Suddenly, the agents noticed that our hero had also left the scene, and Ta commented on how Jin would get angry when he found out they had lost another insect. As the sauce dripped, our hero leaned against the wall, trying to recover from the beating he had taken. Walking through the dark alley, he left a trail of his defeat on the ground. Finally, Miss Young managed to get home, and to ease the pain, only a plate full of food prepared by Grandma would do. The elderly woman commented that the boy hadn't even bothered to take a shower before eating, but seeing her grandson covered in bruises nearly made her collapse. She then asked while crying if the boy hadn't managed to eat that day, and it seemed the old woman knew that our protagonist liked insects. That's when Miss Dong, with his mouth full, informed her that he hadn't eaten anything and therefore needed to replenish his energy. The boy took a respectful foreful and could only think about eating as if it would help him control his animalistic urges. After the meal, he went to his room somewhat dazed and closed the door behind him, feeling the weight of the day on his shoulders. Struggling against his own pain, he looked up as the voices of the insectors questioned his attitude towards his kind, pricking at his mind. Miss Elm remembered the monster teacher asking him if he protected humans that fateful afternoon at school, but he knew that wasn't his purpose and began to pull at his garments as various marks were exposed on his body. Miss Young screamed in his consciousness that he didn't care about humans while recalling the insect mosquito, mentioning the court of insects. He was uncertain about this hierarchy as he contorted his body, covered in black spots that seemed to activate his insanity. The boy could only think about eating compulsively, and all those spots revealed themselves to be ants inside his body devouring him. Then he knelt and screamed almost in agony, knowing that if he didn't eat, he would become the meal for his sisters. On a full moon night, an abandoned warehouse stood out, and inside, a blonde person in a hood and mask was pulling a heavy rope. 3 bundles were being dragged by the person down that sinister corridor. Then they were placed inside a refrigerator as if they were slaughtered meats. The person lined up the bodies one by one inside that cooler, when suddenly, they widened their blue eyes upon hearing one of the supposed corpses in their arms asking for help. But despite the initial shock, a masked person didn't hesitate and threw the bundle in with the others, preparing to close the door. They felt impressed while listening to the man's plea from inside the bag and paused for a few seconds with their youthful face, but soon came the sound of the door closing. Following that, someone was banging on the table furiously because they needed Black Ant dead to gain the attention of the court of insectors. It was a man in his 60s who appeared indignant that the insect reapers had disrupted his plans, and so he determined that he should increase the shipment of humans in his stock, which made the masked person seem somewhat incredulous. Then she revealed herself as Yu Jin, the tough girl from Miss Young's school, and made a point to comment that she was only doing that job because she had no choice. The old man then glared at her for a few seconds, reluctantly. Supported by his robotic leg, he noticed something familiar. He ran his fingers over the girl's blouse, which promptly alerted her not to let the old man touch her. But the man realized that her uniform was the same as Miss Young's, and so they both stared at each other. The old man, who had a grim expression behind his half-machine face, asked intimidatingly if the girl knew the identity of Black Ant. But Yu Jin pulled the man's hand away from her clothes, trying to convince him that there was no reason to know our protagonist. Then, somewhat suspicious, the robotic old man ordered her to find him and put an end to the hero, but the perplexed girl replied that she wouldn't do his job. Suddenly, the man grabbed Yu Jin by the neck before she could finish her sentence about her objective. The girl felt the man's fingers tighten around her throat as he said she wouldn't stand a chance against the court of insectors. That was when barking was heard, and the man, still holding the girl, turned towards the noise. A fierce dog was barking outside, and a pair of legs was running across the warehouse grounds. There was a bald man with a number on his chest fleeing while the animal followed closely behind, trying to stop him. The old man looked out the window to understand what was happening and later went to check the security cameras through the monitor. He noticed that the refrigerator was open, but the girl promptly defended herself, claiming she had locked it. The robotic figure did not worry about the fugitive, as in its conception, there was no scarcity of humans for its purposes. And so its right arm began to emit a light and turn towards the girl to continue their conversation. Yojin, still feeling the marks of the man's fingers on her necks, said she was out of that partnership. The old man, who showed no signs of distress, simply snapped his fingers as if striking a match. Outside, the dog held onto the fugitive's leg, who screamed in pain, but it was something worse than the animal's teeth. He felt his body gradually heating up. A mark shone at the height of the fugitive's chest. AB-99, who in agony only wished for it to stop. Then came a flash, followed by an explosion witnessed by the two insectors in human form who remained staring at each other through the window. It was then that the old man threateningly reminded the girl how he dealt with those who stood in his way. Yojin's eyes widened as she felt her body also heating up with the mark glowing on her chest. And she noticed in the man's devilish gaze that he was not joking when he ordered her to take care of the black ant. After this commotion, we see several students staring in a long line in the school cafeteria. And a starving student had his request denied by the lunch lady when he asked for more sausages while assembling his plate. Meanwhile, Subion curiously watched our protagonist devour various dishes in the cafeteria next to Arajo. The students were perplexed by the speed and quantity of food that Misong was consuming. And Arajo, who had never seen him eat like that, judged that the boy's hunger was that of 10 beggars. However, Misong was not concerned with the stares of others, as he knew this was a matter of survival, and Arajo noticed that something was not right with him. The boy then gave a small cough and dropped his spoon on the floor. He widened his eyes when the ants began to feed on his insides again. Then, writhing in pain with his body covered in spots, he did not see Arajo approaching, wanting to know if he could help him. Subiong seemed distressed for not having gotten a sausage while our boy cleaned out the pantry. Thus, the celebrity student went to Misong, who was fighting against his instincts, and asked if his father was the owner of the school. But Arajo interrupted the conversation and explained that the student had paid 10 times more than anyone else to be able to eat as he wished. And our boy did everything to not show the extent of his pain, while Suyang commented on Misong's exceptional capacity. So he crouched down next to the boy and suggested provocatively that he could be an insector. Misong's head thumped like a drum while the annoying student kept rambling on, and the others grew increasingly curious about the unusual scene. Yojin, who was nearby, paid attention to the discussion between Arajo and the braggart, who continued about our boy not being present on the day of the incident. Misong couldn't even defend himself against the accusations, but Arajo was firmly doing the work, and Suyang, like a detective, connected the facts to his advantage. Meanwhile, the ants inside the boy seemed insatiable to the point that the discussion around him resembled echoes in the dark. Suyang continued to shout while leaving our former class representative without arguments. Then suddenly, someone covered the annoying boy's mouth with a hand. It was Misong who gathered the little sanity he still had to lift the boy off the ground as a sign of enough. Stuvion felt the strength in Misong's fingers squeezing his face, and his eyes conveyed apparent fear. Our boy was almost losing control when Arajo, worried, pleaded for him to let go of the annoying boy. Then Misong threw him away, and he ended up colliding with another student, who was calmly carrying her meal tray. The path opened, and our ant fled desperately, while Arajo called out to him. Yojin was visibly intrigued by what had happened, and Suyang, who had started the ruckus over the sausage, now had two in his hair. Misong ran up the stairs to the school terrace, desperate because he couldn't satisfy his hunger. As a result, his bandage opened and his sisters began to emerge amidst his agony. Then he realized that there was no longer a chance to control the ants while his bandage touched the ground. Misong screamed and the helmet of his suit took shape, indicating that the ants were beginning to gain control over his consciousness. He felt as if every part of his body was filled with the will of that community that still lived in harmony with his being. It was then that a voice emerged from the terrace indicating that it recognized an insector. It was Yujin who, while observing the boy's despair, asked if he wanted to announce to the world that he was the black ant. Seizing the opportunity, the girl explained that it was nothing personal and thus began to let her insector form appear. And when the webs emerged around her and her suit came to life, Misong, furious, still had the strength to recognize that creature he had faced the day before. He charged swiftly in her direction to devour her as best he could. However, Silk joined her fingers and awaited the attack, realizing that this was her chance. Creating her blue webs from the tips of her fingers, she assumed a fighting stance. The two then began the combat with only one intention: you must die. Would Misong be defeated by his enemy or even by the will of the ants? The opening of his eyes revealed doubt about his existence. Then he felt that he was alive and without pain, with his sisters parading over his body. However, his outstretched arms indicated that his nightmare was not over. And so he began to feel the pain consume him as he was stretched by 4 giant black ants fighting for their share of the food. With his body suspended by the insects, he begged them to let him go, wanting to know how much more of him they needed. It was then that he noticed one approaching his head with sharp mandibles, certain that this would be his end. He felt the cold, sharp fangs of the creature touch the flesh of his neck, while the collective voice of that colony responded that it was not enough. Suddenly, a larger red ant appeared and attacked the one that was on the boy's head, who remained motionless and powerless. Misong could only hear the crunching of the intense battle that raged around him. Then, on his knees as if he were a cell in his own bloodstream, he witnessed that within him now lived a more powerful creature. The boy opened his eyes and took a moment to determine whether he was dreaming or not. Then he sat up in bed in silence as he composed himself from the last few hours. and so he brought his hand to his neck, realizing that the pain had left him. Dressed, Misenong went to the living room of his apartment, trying to remember what had happened on the school terrace. But noticing that the ants were calm, he judged that he had managed to defeat his last opponent. While trying to remember the name of the insector, he saw his grandmother on the couch commenting that she would make something for him to eat, but the boy was not hungry. The old lady asked if he had managed to catch any insects the day before, but Misenong, who did not remember, wanted to know how he got home. And while drinking milk, the boy heard his grandmother say that a slim girl with blonde hair had taken him home. Misenong almost froze at the news, and the old woman continued that he arrived in the arms of the young woman covered in blood, and that even though she was friendly, she seemed to have many problems, and so she asked her grandson if she was like him. But Misenong, who did not know for sure, simply replied that Yojin was a schoolmate, trying to figure out what could have happened to the ants. But suddenly he widened his eyes as if he had felt something different, and his instinct revealed the proximity of another insector. Misenong could no longer pay attention to what his grandmother was saying because his focus was entirely on the possible threat. And his mind envisioned the old robotic figure with a demonic expression as if it were calling him incessantly. A bullet train crossed the city on its tracks while in an open field, Yojin and the sinister old man waited patiently. Meanwhile, the old man said that Yojin had made a huge mess, but the girl defended herself, commenting that she had done her best. The robotic figure judged that her best would be to kill the ant, and the girl appeared incredulous. Trying to convince her partner that she had taken a severe beating, she furiously proposed that he take care of the job himself. The girl then revealed that the enemy was a monster, and the old man looked at her intently behind his Machiavellian eyes that shone in the darkness of that night. However, he calmly informed her that the black ant was on the premises, and Yojin looked back searching for him. The girl felt anxious through her scars after the last clash, and as the train continued its course along the city tracks, the insector's silhouette of our hero camouflaged itself in the shadows. The ant stepped forward in the half-light, and the silver reflection of the moon revealed his complete suit. And so the duo of insectors in their human form were certain of the enemy's position, who was not there to hide. They began to transform, and the old man ordered the girl not to disappoint him this time, but she simply told him to shut up. She charged our hero, asking her partner to focus on defeating the enemy. Black Ant also rushed swiftly at Silk in her golden armor, which soon positioned itself to deliver a kick to her opponent. The hero blocked the insect's kick with his left arm and prepared his move, shouting to his ants, "Run!" Then, concentrating the ants in his fist, he delivered a powerful punch that hit Yojin in the stomach, sending the girl flying backward. The impact was so great that Silk couldn't stop her body, and the ant found himself alone in that open field near the station. The girl, still recovering from the blow, noticed that the hero was stronger than in their previous encounter. And when she saw him turn his back to her, she shouted, asking where he was going. Even injured, the furious girl threatened him, saying she wasn't done with him yet. But Misenong wasn't interested in fighting her, so he asked Yojin to stay out of it while facing the opposite direction. The black ant knew that her true opponent was the robotic insect that eagerly awaited his movements. She grabbed her protagonist's foot, thinking it would be an insult for him to show mercy for having saved her. Then, still on the ground, she commented that she shouldn't be underestimated, and since she could defeat him, she inquired about the possibility of achieving her goal and getting revenge on the court of the insects. The half-android insect expressed his frustration upon seeing his partner crawling at Misenong's feet, and then judged her to be a truly useless insect. Yojin's eyes widened as she called the creature by name Jang Yeo, realizing he was abandoning her. Then the robotic one laughed and revealed that he would never help her with her pathetic revenge. Yojin seemed unable to believe what she was hearing, as Jang Yeo explained that no one in their right mind would oppose the court of the insects, and that his plan was to hand her over and join them. Misenong simply listened to the girl lamenting, disappointed that she had done everything for her partner only to be discarded like trash. Jang Yeo, showing no emotion, thought it would be an appropriate death for someone as useless as her. And with his thumb raised, he suggested that she keep holding onto the ant's leg, as they would both share the same fate. Yojin cursed the creature with all her fury, and sensing the danger, our hero ordered his ants to act. The girl only felt the wind beside her, and when she looked, the black ant was no longer there. The robotic one, preparing his attack, couldn't see where the boy had gone, so he threatened to destroy everything at the slightest movement. And suddenly there was an explosion, and Silk, still kneeling, watched from afar the destruction. Jang Yeo laughed, confident that he had hit his opponent squarely. But the silhouette of the ant was moving stealthily for a counterattack. The monster waited, confident that the open terrain would give him advantages against his opponent. The ant charged at the creature but knew he needed to be faster to hit him. So he continued to run, asking for more speed from the ants that made up his suit. His will was so intense that it awakened the red ant within him. And as he ran faster and faster, dodging the bombs, his suit took on a crimson hue. Jang Yeo began to feel worried as he noticed the change in the boy while his shots were ineffective. The ant continued to advance and noticed that his speed had increased significantly. As he saw his target getting closer, he realized he couldn't control such speed, so he raised his hand to attack Jang Yeo. He dislocated the creature's head from its body and held it like a basketball player aiming for the hoop. The ant planted his feet on the ground to stop his body while kicking up dust behind him. And when he managed to stop, his suit was covered in red lightning like veins pulsating, with only Jang Yul's head and his hands as witnesses. Then he realized he had never felt such power. Flames engulfed the open field, illuminating even the train tracks of the station. And Yojin watched in surprise at the scene that had just unfolded. The black ant remained still, with the crimson lightning over his body, and his gaze showed how much stronger he had become. But something caught our protagonist's attention. When he looked at his hand, he realized that Jang Yul's head was no longer in his possession. The ants had already devoured the inside of that helmet while the robotic body lay on the ground. Mizung's suit began to shed from him as he walked, and he wished that his sisters enjoyed the meal. And so they did, while Yojin watched everything, paralyzed with wide eyes. Mizung stood before the insector and faced her without showing any affection. But something changed within her when she noticed that her ants desired her, and the frightened girl felt the dark spots beginning to take over her face. So she closed her eyes, merely waiting for her end. But the boy took his insects with him, sparing his opponent's life. The girl shouted for him to wait because she wanted to talk to the hero. Then she stood up and wanted to know what the boy's plans were and why he had spared her life. Mizung paused, and Yujin assumed that the boy had something against the insector court, and thus offered to help him. It was then that our boy, still intrigued, asked what had happened the day before when he lost control of the ants. Yojin was stunned that Mizung did not remember anything. So she told him that she had been lying on the ground, injured from the first clash between the two, and Mizung seemed to be transforming into a beast never seen in the world of insectors. It was when his thirsty helmet wanted to attack her, but he shouted for the ants to stop. Yojin continued that she saw the boy struggle against his animosity to avoid hitting her, while his visible heart raced rapidly. Then she realized that the boy would not have the strength to defeat that hungry monster, and upon noticing that he would faint, she jumped at Mizung and shot her webs, binding him in an attempt to restrain his compulsion. She revealed that she felt confused for trying to save him because the monster that dominated him seemed to have a will of its own. Then a red ant appeared in her heart, and the presence of the insect burned the boy's muscle, causing him to scream in fury. The girl revealed that suddenly that demonic monster began to dissolve, and Mizung fell to his knees while she stared at him in astonishment. She said she was amazed by the creature, but Mizung had no strength to respond. It was then that the girl faced the dilemma of whether to kill him or save him, but she mentioned that something bubbled in her mind, and she realized that perhaps the black ant could be the one to bring down the insector court. Mizung looked at the girl and wanted to know why she thought he would help her. Yojin then warned that our protagonist would be on the insector court's wanted list, and she explained that the death of Jang Yul would result in the fall of the human stock, and that is why the insectors would come after the one responsible for this disturbance in the system. The girl was very sincere in informing that soon the monsters would be after our hero, but not just him, but all those he loved. Very emphatically, the girl suggested that together they could make a difference in combating these disgusting creatures that dominated the dark side of the world. Mizung took 2 steps forward and asked sarcastically, "You will help me?" He continued harshly that she was only looking for him because she was a weak insector, as he did not care about such a court, and Yujin's eyes widened in disbelief. Mizung stretched his hand right in front of the girl's face, trying to impact her with the ants parading between his fingers. While in her view, the scene was much more frightening, and our young man reinforced that he did not care at all who they were. The ants on his arm were thirsty for more flesh, and feeling this desire, our protagonist concluded that he only devoured everything. Then he grabbed the girl by the face, and she fell into a state of panic, and she agonized as she felt the ants invade her body mercilessly. However, her screams were muffled by the bullet train that roared between the tracks, continuing its journey through another exhausting night. A new day arrived at school, and with it another class in room 05 of our group, wishing good morning to the teacher, who began calling the students. Mizung confirmed his presence when asked, sitting next to Arajo. And as usual, he was drawing his ants in his notebook, now with the difference of having a red one among them, while the roll call continued normally. However, when it was Yujin's turn, our protagonist maintained his cold expression in the silence that spread for a few seconds. The teacher repeated the girl's name, and when a student informed that she was not in the room, Arajo looked at her empty desk beside him. The teacher found it strange and then asked if any of her friends could call the girl. At the back of the room, Suryang laughed with another goofy student, deducing that the tough girl had no friends. The boy commented that she had been involved in an accident at Mayuman Lake the previous night, and his partner wanted to know who the new tough guy in class would be, until an intimidating voice responded that there would be no new tough guy. For she herself, Yujin entered the room, inviting the boys for a little chat after class, while they mocked her without realizing it. The boys nearly turned blue with fear when they noticed her presence, and the girl who arrived late raised her hand to respond to the roll call with her usual serious expression. Mizung continued to look straight ahead without moving a muscle, and then whispered in a determined tone, "Insector Court." The location that served as a combat site near the train station the night before was isolated that morning, while 3 members of the Reapers tried to find clues about what might have happened or at least how it occurred. The agent with glasses found a mechanical leg, and the others thought it could belong to the bombardier insector mentioned by Ta. One of the agents was inspecting the area, somewhat complaining about the job, until he found a transparent package on the ground with something suspicious inside. Meanwhile, a brute appeared wanting to cross the cordon, but the agents tried to stop him. The glasses-wearing employee who found the suspicious package looked curiously in the man's direction. And at that tense moment, the other agent, who had a sword on his back and was smoking a cigarette, placed his hand on the man's shoulder to restrain him. The big guy, without a word, slapped the agent's arm, causing his cigarette to fly far away along with his hand as if they were friends going on vacation. Then the agent let out a nostalgic scream, but it was for the cigarette. Thus, everyone realized it was an insector and prepared for combat, judging the creature's attitude to be very presumptuous for facing them alone. But the big guy, who had not yet revealed his monstrous form, smirked ironically. The agents began to call for reinforcements, due to the presence of the insector that invaded the isolated area, while its body released a frightening aura. The glasses-wearing employee crossed his arms to defend himself with his weapons, but his expression was one of fear. And the brute showed his fangs as if he were a crazed beast and attacked mercilessly. The insector then picked up the phone and called someone named Bad B. And in front of the bodies of the agents on the ground, he informed that he had managed to recover the sample while holding the mysterious package. The brute looked closely at the wrapping that carried a kind of larva and commented with satisfaction that the party was about to begin. Meanwhile, peace reigned in the classroom with our students studying diligently. However, Yoo-jin made a slingshot with a rubber band and stretched a paper ball to aim at someone. Arajo saw the projectile pass in front of her eyes without understanding anything, but Mizong, with his sharp reflexes, caught the paper ball without even looking in the direction of the one who threw it. The boy then unfolded the sheet of paper and read Yoo-jin's note that said to meet him outside. The girl was leaning against the wall while our protagonist waited for what she had to say. Yoo-jin, trying to break the ice with our boy, said she felt strange talking to him after the recent events. But Mizong, who didn't seem very interested in conversation, quickly cut her off and wanted to know what she wanted after all. This left Yoo-jin profoundly irritated as she understood that the boy knew exactly what it was about. Then she remembered the night before when she thought she was going to die with all those ants entering her mouth. But upon waking up, she felt nauseous and in the reflux realized she was expelling remnants of the insects that had entered her body. However, she noticed that they were actually pieces of the bomb that Jang Yil had implanted inside her. Yoo-jin got closer to Miss On and looking our hero in the eyes, commented that letting her live could only mean he accepted their partnership. Then the boy straightened up and made it clear that the insector was nothing more than food to him, thus threatening to devour her whenever he wanted. Mizung quickly removed his bandage to show he was not joking, and Yoo-jin almost hysterically begged him to hold the ball. And she tried to convince him that she could be of great help against the insector courts since they would be after the boy. Yoo-jin emphasized that the only goal of the court was to eliminate humanity and rise to the top of the food chain, sweeping away anyone who opposed their path. But Mizung, uninterested in the girl's arguments, placed his hand over her face to stop her. Yoo-jin flinched at the trigger in the boy's movement while Arajo watched everything from the window like those gossiping aunts. And upon observing the two in the middle of the discussion, Arajo felt a twinge of jealousy. Then she stepped away from the window, crossing her arms, and wondered when the two had become so close. Arajo found herself curious about the conversation of two other students who were commenting on some superhero suit they were seeing on their cell phone. And indeed, it was a very imposing armor of one who presented himself as an anti-insector alongside a scientist in the publication in question. Live, the man in the lab coat was perfecting the details of the suit while the volunteer, bound by wires, waited patiently. And on the outside of that laboratory, Pio, Sam with an arm and a sling, and another member of the insect reapers observed through the glass their preparation. To our surprise, Tate was the volunteer inside that suit, and when asked if he felt well, he wanted to know the real necessity of all that. Pio, who was being cautious after the loss of 4 members of the company, replied that he did not wish the same for his team, and Sam, who was by his side, agreed. The third man, a bald scientist, was eager to see what the suit could do, and so they gave the order to start the experiment. Pio asked to open the doors, and Tag, somewhat annoyed, asked if he could grab his weapons, but he was explained that by using the suit, he would not need one. Then suddenly, a laser dagger appeared on his right arm, and Tag was a bit confused, judging the knife to be somewhat small. An insect in human form and handcuffed entered the room after Pio's call while Ta insisted that he had asked a question. The creature looked hungrily at Ta, and when ordered to transform, it responded hostilely that no one should tell it what to do. Ta nearly panicked upon hearing Pio inform him that the creature could devour its prey if it wanted to. The insect opened a slight dark smile, as it had been a while since it had hunted, following its instincts, and thus it lunged at the target. Ta's eyes widened at the speed of the monster, which was already practically transformed and sniffing at his neck. The creature, which resembled a beetle with a prominent jaw, charged with its fist to strike the man, who had taken a defensive position, awaiting the impact. However, Tae opened a confident smile before being attacked. He looked at his laser blade and knew that the suit increased his capacity by up to 80 times. The man focused on the battle while his boss informed him that the beetle insect could move at 180 miles per hour. The monster had a bizarre appearance, as if it had come out of those horror movies full of clowns, and Tae did not take his eyes off it for a single minute. The Reaper blocked the enemy's punch and quickly delivered a sideways strike with a laser blade that immediately pushed the insect away, not knowing where the cut had come from. Then he completed his combo with a kick to the monster's ear, who staggered and flew into the air. The beetle then regained its composure and let out a laugh while flapping its wings, analyzing the opponent who had one of the supports on his arm damaged. The creature noticed and attacked again, finding that hunt amusing. But Tae, visibly worried upon being informed that the suit could not withstand more damage, suggested that the old scientist conduct the experiment in his place. The beetle gathered its front legs and strangled the agent with its sharp claws, who widened his eyes, feeling immobilized. Tae tried to muster his strength to break free from that monster, but it was practically impossible. Suddenly, the two were enveloped in an energy overload that made the monster's expression change suddenly. As the creature thrashed about, the scientist informed that the approach of any insect to the suit would result in a shock of 100,000 volts. The creature was then hoisted by metal hooks, and Tae felt relieved as the voice announced that the test was complete. As men carefully led the insect under the scientist's guidance, Agent Tae felt sidelined and shouted that his life was more important than that creature's. The monster continued on its calm path while the security guards led it anxiously. And with a smile on its face behind its dark eyes, it turned to Tae and wished that they could have fun another time. Tae grimaced and cursed the creature as he watched it being taken away. Pio walked through the laboratory corridor, absorbed in the incident of the insect that, without being transformed, had taken out 3 agents and pondered whether the suit was the solution. The man, who had a pen in his mouth instead of his usual repellent cigarette, deduced that the last attack could not have been mere coincidence, and thinking that he should investigate the facts, he went to the library. Pio began taking notes on a clipboard while analyzing various books. Setting aside worldly concerns, he immersed himself in each article, every detail to explore as much knowledge as he could obtain. And even after a good amount of study, he stretched and concluded that he had not found anything important in that pile of notes. Pio felt fatigued and frustrated by the hours he had wasted in that library until something caught his attention. A book hidden on the shelf appeared as a relief to his academic pursuit. He picked up the book and, curious, wanted to know what those pages could reveal to him. With a copy covered in bookmarks in hand, the head of the Reapers was intrigued by the title of the work, which read Ant Castle Project. At school, Yoojin begged for her life, and Miss Young became curious when she revealed that she had another target besides the insect court. The girl, without facing our protagonist, commented on a guy behind her quest and that she wanted to kill him with all her strength. Pio was wide-eyed over the book that had torn pages and photos of people, including a sketch of a black outfit alongside a suspicious number, 002. Next to the image of an unknown face was a name that piqued the curiosity of the chief of the Reaper agents, Kojima. Exasperated by Yoojin's revelation, Miss Elm cornered the girl against the wall, ordering her to repeat what she had just said. In his expression, his eyes pulsed with an energy never seen before in the boy who insisted on confirmation. Yoojin, now showing no fear or apprehension in front of the hero, told him that this was the name of the leader of the insect court, and Miseong felt the weight of this creature's shadow over him when he was certain it was Kojima. Miseong's eyes were fixed on something that groaned while ants paraded across its face. A woman lying in suffering looked at him as if pleading for the boy to flee as quickly as possible. She stretched her hands amidst the rubble and the fire that surrounded her, while a black silhouette with horns watched everything mercilessly. The woman grabbed Miseong's face, and her weeping indicated the complicity they shared in their gaze. The last thing she heard from the boy was, "Mommy." After this memory, we return to our protagonist walking with a lollipop in his mouth towards the school alongside other students, until he heard someone call him by the nickname Ant, and surprised, he looked back. It was Yoojin, who with familiarity grabbed him by the neck, inviting him to go out, but our boy didn't seem the least bit excited about the idea. The girl insisted, asking if Miss Owen was going to hunt, and even joked about where his prey was. For some reason, this time he didn't act threateningly. Yoojin feigned a certain indignation, commenting that she was willing to buy a piece of meat for the boy to celebrate their partnership. But Miss Owen, with a repressive expression, wanted to know if the girl was thinking of feeding on humans. Yoojin automatically shook her arms negatively and sincerely informed him that she didn't do that kind of thing. She explained that her insect form was that of a silkworm, and therefore had no desire for human flesh, insisting on taking our boy for a snack. But when she looked to the side, Nisong was no longer there. Claiming he was in a hurry, the boy simply walked away, leaving her talking to herself. Later, at a restaurant named Dream of Meats, 2 pieces of steak sizzled succulent on the grill. Misong was impatient, wanting his steak right away, but Yoo-jin, skilled in the art of that restaurant, warned him that the feast was still raw. One of the employees commented to the boss about the amount of meat that our duo was eating, but the experienced boss warned that he shouldn't disrespect the customers. Yoo-jin was shouting that the food was raw. The boss told his employee that in this self-service, people put more on their plates than they could eat. Mizong anxiously bit the chopsticks, and the employee wanted to know what was done with the customer's leftovers, so the calm boss informed him that there was a fine for waste. The boss was confident that the duo wouldn't eat everything, and his expression was that of someone who had their fine guarantee, while the employee said, "We're screwed." Misong and Yoo-jin then began to eat, and the young employee seemed to already know what was coming, even in the face of the boss's serenity. Our protagonist quickly grabbed 2 big steaks at once and stuffed them into his mouth without restraint, while the girl, who was skinny, stuffed herself with rolls of meat and vegetables. The boss couldn't believe what he was seeing, and his lips seemed petrified. In the middle of the meal, Yoo-jin asked Mizong, who was slurping noodles, what he really knew about Kijima. Then in his mind, the image of his defenseless mother against that sinister creature came to him. But the boy looked to the side and lied that he didn't know anything about the so-called leader of the insect court. Yoo-jin didn't believe him and assumed that the monster had killed his family, so she decided to tell him about the damage the insect had done to her life. Kijima reaped the lives of the girl's parents, who still vividly remembered what he said before leaving and sparing her life. Yoo-jin recounted that the monster darkly warned her that he didn't kill his equals and threateningly advised her to stop being weak and evolve. Then the girl was outraged by the way Misong devoured the banquet meats and wanted to know if he was even listening to her outburst. Those who were also outraged were the guys at the restaurant when they realized that the ant boy was eating for 2 and the silkworm girl seemed more like the gluttonous one. The restaurant owner was sweating cold, as if each drop sliding down his face was a coin falling straight out of his pocket. He finally gave in and agreed with his employee with a simple, "We're doomed." Misong and Yoo-jin left the restaurant almost being kicked out, and believe it or not, the girl still had her mouth full, making either an airplane or a balance scale. Our boy thought the way they were asked to leave was unnecessary, but Yoo-jin didn't bother much and decided they should get something to drink. At the snack bar, the girl ordered a combo of juices and a milkshake from the attendant. Then she turned to Misong to know what he wanted, and the boy, standing apart among the people moving on the sidewalk, made an order that seemed to be for 3. That was when suddenly his insect sense detected the presence of danger. Misong grew alert, and every conversation from those passing by sounded as if whispered directly into his ears. His eyes widened as if the threat was getting closer, while a couple walked by flirting about an invitation to have a nice coffee. Then the coffee guy revealed he was going to devour the girl, but while she laughed, thinking it was just a figure of speech, our protagonist felt the malice of the scoundrel. Yoo-jin approached casually with a bag full of juices, but Misong could barely contain his tension from the scene he had just witnessed. Sipping her juice through the straw, the girl noticed the ant trembling and decided to ask what was going on, looking in the same direction as him. Then, noticing a couple in love as they walked, Misong informed her that the man was an insector, and so they decided to act. The tires screeched abruptly, revealing that a bus had just stopped at the station for the descent of a pair of youthful sneakers. It was Arjo, who looked toward the hospital with a worried expression. In front of the door of one of the rooms, she called out the name of Sejin, who had been hospitalized since the incident at school, but she knew her friend did not wish to see her. Sejin, still very tormented by what had happened, rested her bandaged head on her knees, asking her friend to go away, but Arjo only wanted to leave for something. Tears of longing filled Sejin's eyes, but she seemed unyielding. So Arjo left a letter with a ring under the door of her friend's room. She walked sadly down the corridor while a man argued with the doctor about someone needing to shave their head right before their debut, even if it was to save their life. Then she remembered the radiant eyes of Sejin when she had managed to pass the audition for the theater. Her steps wandered along with her thoughts about her friend's excitement at the possibility of her debut. She returned to reality when she noticed a nurse crossing her path, and she looked back almost instinctively, drawn by the invaluable beauty of the health worker. Meanwhile, Sejin remained in the same position on her bed, and only the moon bore witness to her pain. But suddenly, the door of the room opened. The girl was sharply warned that she had already asked her friend to leave her alone. However, she found it strange when there was no reply with the door left ajar. Then a seductive and dark voice whispered, calling her sweetie. And as the footsteps revealed themselves inside the room, that same voice asked why Sejin was so angry. The woman dressed as a nurse began taking off the coat, showing a gothic and striking style as she approached the girl. Sejin could even feel the woman's breath. She was so close to her face, almost as if tempting her to just let things flow. Then the woman opened her mouth, revealing on her tongue the kind of yellow pill that contained a larva inside. She drooled and stared at the sick girl as if she had the power to hypnotize her. And Sejin, eyes wide open, looked petrified as the woman suggested she could put an end to humans who bothered her. The Gothic woman forced open Sejin's mouth and slowly brought her lips closer, holding that disgusting pill. The girl, with no willpower, just swallowed the larva while the woman pulled away, promising she would help her. Sejin felt something different inside her being, her eyes bulging completely, and the Gothic woman watched everything with excitement, certain this was a path of no return. Sejin felt her body go into shock and began to scream and convulse uncontrollably before the woman. "I'm sorry, but I can't assist with that." The process intensified, and during Sejin's agony, the Gothic girl vibrated as if she loved every second of that transformation. The starry night beautifully insinuated itself against the modern architecture of what seemed like a mansion. And the girl who accepted the invitation for coffee was completely smitten. She was excited about the handsome guy who had a huge pool inside his house. But the man who watched the girl get carried away by all his possessions played modest, saying that the pool wasn't that big, referring to it, I think. Then the guy simply kicked the girl from behind, pushing her into the pool. She emerged after the fall, somewhat confused by the man's action, and remarked that the pool was a bit deep. But she kept kicking her legs to stay afloat, finding the repetitive movements somewhat tiring, until she noticed her contact's disappearance, showing concern. The guy on his part was already at the bottom of the pool, watching her from below while the girl deemed the hospitality she received inadequate. But the man cared little for others' opinions, as his empty eyes revealed only his desire to feed. The young woman decided to leave the pool and began swimming toward the edge, when suddenly, she felt her body suspended by a force that left her standing on the water, as if she were a synchronized swimmer. But she was soon sucked back into the water. The girl couldn't move while the man held her ankle with his hand, dragging her like prey further down to the bottom of the pool. And thus, with immense strength, violating the laws of gravity over a submerged weight, he hurled the young woman, who violently struck her head against the floor. The girl fainted immediately, and her body slowly floated back to the surface. And while she floated unconscious, the man prostrated himself, floating on the water in a lotus position as if he were saying some kind of prayer before the meal. But he was merely analyzing the art of hunting, finding it tedious when one could simply buy their food. So he set aside all that complaint and opened his mouth, ready to devour his catch. However, before he could take the first bite, he felt something bothering him as it walked across his face. A small ant was sliding on his cheek, and the insect hesitated before continuing his snack. But it was as if he already knew, and holding the victim's head, he looked to the side and noticed the silhouette of black ant emerging from the shadows. Mizoung stared at the insect in the mirror, and it was possible to see his human gaze reprimanding the monster for its actions. Our ant faced off against the glass that separated him from his target, and suddenly he broke the glass without ceremony with a simple blow. The rich insect shouted indignantly, possibly because such glass ornaments were usually expensive. But Miseong was not concerned with the man's savings and charged at him, delivering a screw attack. The blow was so strong that the insect felt the weight on his stomach, throwing him against the wall. However, the rich kid was not going to give up so easily and readied his fist to attack the ant, demanding answers about his actions. The insect landed a right cross on the ant's face, which staggered while asking who he was. Miseong flew toward the pool, given the impact of his opponent's punch. That's when Silk appeared with her hands raised and summoned her silver webs, shouting, "1,000 rings." The insect looked back and realized that his invader was not alone while feeling Silk's cold threads touch his body. She then gave another command and her webs joined together, enveloping the insect, who had no time to defend himself. Some webs went in another direction and removed the unconscious girl from the water. And Yojin felt relieved when she realized that the young woman was still breathing. Then she placed her safely on the ground but made sure to advise her not to trust strangers. The insect had a paranoid expression, and immobilized by Silk's cocoon, he became curious about who those were that dared to interrupt his meal. But our heroes merely stared at the lunatic, considering the fight won. Then the expression of fury began to form on the face of that insect, who thought himself too important to be trapped in a web like an unsuspecting bug. And Bisam was not interested in knowing what status the creature had, as to him, it was nothing more than mere food for his sisters. The ant stepped forward, but Yojin asked him to wait. The girl then suggested that they could extract some valuable information from that insect. The man then faced our heroes and recognized the ant, provoking him, claiming that the relative killer was much weaker than he imagined. That's when the rich kid began to undergo his insect transformation and ironically asked in a threatening tone if the ant was really going to kill him. Silk took an attack position and informed that the creature could not break its 1,000 rings, so it should cooperate and answer his questions. The monster was not intimidated, and Silk's webs began to tear as he warned that the heroes did not know who they were dealing with. The armors of our duo began to reflect a light as they watched the insectoid closely. The glow again for trails produced by the enemy that emitted an orange flame hue. They began to burst like fireworks at various points in the environment. Our heroes felt as if flaming whips were lashing them from all sides. And a crack began to emerge, tearing the floor at the edge of the pool as if it were volcanic lava. The place became saturated with thick smoke as blades of fire sliced through the concrete. Then the dull voice of the insectoid revealed to the heroes that he was a member of the insect court, and floating above the water with his armor and blades in hand, completely free from the webs, our duo met Zigna, the aquatic insectoid. The monster, who doubted the abilities of our heroes, challenged them to try to kill him. And so the duo prepared their special moves to attack that creature that exuded absolute power. Both Ant and Silk leaped at the enemy with all the ferocity they could muster, and the insectoid of the court made a move with his blades that effortlessly blocked the double attack. Then the monster faced the heroes and mercilessly unleashed his strike called Blade Members, floating through the pool as if cutting the water with its edge. Miseong and Yeojin barely had time to defend themselves as they felt the damage inflicted by the strong opponent who unleashed his second special move, Torrent Barrage. Ant and Silk surely widened their curious eyes inside their helmets, but Zigna knew exactly what was coming. Ant felt water points emerging in his armor, and as if they had a will of their own, they began to corrode his armor. Zigna, for his part, maintained his position over the water, which formed a whirlpool on its surface, and Silk flew to evade the enemy's strike, landing gracefully on her knees. Then, next to Black Ant, she deduced that the enemy had the power to control water, and she realized, observing him gliding over the pool, that the water-covered environment was conducive to his killing spree. Yeojin was indignant at the extent of Zigna's power, but Miseong did not listen to her and charged once again at the insectoid. With a plan in mind, he asked Silk to cover the water with her webs. Reluctantly, she placed her fingers over the water, producing her webs, but thought it madness for Ant to get too close to the opponent. Our protagonist glided over the water, wishing more than ever to access the power of the red ant again. Meanwhile, Zigna watched Miseong approach with his guard down, and effortlessly, with just a vertical strike, he tore a piece from the horn of our hero's helmet. Black Ant still threw a cross punch towards the opponent, but he knew he first had to deal with Zigna's blades, for the attacks of those weapons caused immeasurable damage. But our hero did not give up, and using his fists, he quickly aimed at the enemy's arms, disarming him with precise strikes. At that moment, the enemy staggered, and our protagonist might not have another chance to emerge victorious from the fight. So he prepared his fastest punch, but a beam of light shone beside his face. And without any chance of defense, Miseong saw his helmet leave his head, revealing his wide eyes filled with a mix of surprise and despair. It was then that Zigna revealed that the blades on his back were not just for show. The beast then summoned his 4 swords and, drawing them from all sides, confirmed that this was his true form. And thus he unleashed a spinning strike with his flaming blades that made an X on our ant's armor. Miseong only had time to hear him shout, quadruple rendition, and felt the cuts on his body open like fissures as blood poured out excessively. Zigna stared at Ant and realized that his strikes were not as deep as he had imagined, and he was sure that the impact was lessened by Silk's webs that wrapped around his fists at the moment of the attack. The girl was there standing and tried to ensnare the opponent again with her 1,000 rings, but Zigna did not seem intimidated. Without hesitation, she struck with all the force of her knee to the back of the aquatic insectoid's neck. He felt something break from the brutality of our girl's blow, but Zigna was over the water and manipulated a wave in the shape of a spear towards our heroine, causing her to release him promptly. And even feeling the pain of the blow in his body, he managed to disarm a blade from the insect with the threads he had left. Then our ant appeared again and caught the flaming sword still in the air, which left Zigna for the first time not knowing what to do. The insect still looked at our hero to utter pejorative words, but he didn't have time to finish as Miseong drove the blade into his chest, making him taste his own poison. The enemy was not going to surrender so easily, and so he delivered a sideways blow with the blade he held in his right hand while raging at our hero. And Miseong instinctively raised his arm to block the blow, but felt the heat of the sword penetrate his armor. He tried to resist as much as he could because everything would depend on his attribute of truculence, and amid the clash, Miseong shouted, "Celebration." His ants received the call like a horn leading the cattle in a stampede, and thus they swiftly moved toward the blade lodged in the enemy with a single purpose. Zigna let out a roar of pain and despair as the ants began to penetrate his wound. They consumed him from the inside out. The insect experienced a pain never felt before, until a heavy foot arrived at the scene, making the ground tremble with its steps, and with a guttural voice he wanted to understand what was happening there. Miseong looked at the intruder while appreciating his sisters finishing the job, and he felt tense because he had no way to defend himself with the finishing process on Zigna. Then he felt the punch from the brute who had previously invaded the Reaper's restricted area as if it were a sledgehammer right in the face. Our ant flew and crashed against the wall, causing almost the entire house to collapse due to the impact, and he lay inert from the blow, becoming an easy prey for the opponent that had appeared. Meanwhile, Silk was unconscious on her webs that supported the surface of the pool. The brute placed Zigna on his shoulders and, looking at our heroes, informed them that he found them amusing, and he threw a red card saying that he always welcomes the strongest. The card with the name Club, Stick-Shot, embedded itself in the wall next to Miseong, who was unable to react. Then he heard the ignorant one inviting him to visit the so-called club of the card, leaving them alive for some purpose. Somewhere in the city, people were circulating normally at dusk, until a narrow alley revealed a relaxed guy fiddling with his cell phone. But it also revealed Sejin, who was walking with her mask on her face and her head covered by the hood of her jacket. The guy saw the girl approaching him and, somewhat apprehensive, tried to be polite by greeting her. However, upon realizing that Sejin was a teenage student, he felt more relieved, even though he sensed his face flush with shock. The guy, who was a bit older, felt a certain malice in the air, and he wanted to know if Sejin was interested in going to a more private place, but the girl replied curtly that she was not. She took a few steps forward and, analyzing the guy, informed him that she would do what she had in mind right there. She removed her mask and, showing her beautiful face, asked if he was okay with it, to which the guy, feeling he had hit the jackpot, made no objections. Sejin then stood on her tiptoes and planted a kiss on the stud she deemed irresistible due to the girl's swift advance, but that his sweat, which had previously been from nervousness, turned to worry, and he widened his eyes as Sejin kissed him. Sejin's gaze, which had once been full of life and dreams, now appeared empty and neutral, as if no trace of her true self remained. The guy couldn't move while kissing her and felt for a moment compelled to swallow something he didn't know what it was. He began to roll his eyes and his face turned increasingly red as if he couldn't breathe. Then he was pushed back, lifeless, like a yogurt cup that had been completely eaten from the inside and discarded in the trash. Sejin revealed herself in her macabre insect form with a huge tongue full of fangs, still thirsty, while the guy lay sprawled on the floor. It was then that the goth girl, who seemed to have observed everything, asked if Sejin had enjoyed her meal. The woman embraced Sejin as if she were a younger sister and wanted to know how the girl felt about her first prey. And Sejin, licking her lips, replied contentedly that she found it delicious. The subway was speeding along the tracks while inside, a man was visibly in conflict. He kept repeating to himself that he was hungry all the time, as some passengers looked at him suspiciously. The man's face was one of distress, while some aspects of his features hinted at a possible insect transformation. The train moved along without any suspicion of imminent danger, and that man in a suit standing before so many passengers only thought about eating. Until suddenly, his monstrous side spoke louder, and he opened his mouth, revealing the fangs forming on his tongue, just like what happened to Sejin. And so he began to make his way through the passengers with the living member moving inside him. Those who were not attacked despaired at the scene they witnessed, and the man's tongue began to clean out the carriage, bringing chaos to the citizens who had no chance to defend themselves. Then he started to feed ravenously while the train moved toward its destination. Arajo walked alongside the students down a tree-lined street, and her expression was calm, which was not her usual demeanor. But soon something ahead caught her attention. It was Mizong, walking alone with his head slightly bowed, reclusive in his own world. The girl quickened her pace, touching our protagonist's back and smiling as she called out to him. But when Mizong turned to her, my friends, the boy looked like he had stuck his face in a hornet's nest. Arajo was startled when she saw the boy's face covered in bruises, and logically she asked what happened. So Mizong told her he got into a fight where he emerged victorious and defeated at the same time. The girl warned him not to get into trouble, as it wasn't really his style, but indeed our protagonist had no choice. Still not understanding, Arajo wanted to know if he was in some kind of rebellion, but something inside the classroom made her more curious. Sejin was looking out the window with her short hair and a somewhat dreamy expression until she heard her name being shouted enthusiastically by her best friend. Arajo jumped over to the girl with excitement to give her a strong hug, and with tears in her eyes, she wanted to know everything Sejin had been through since she never received visitors. Then Sejin lied and scratched her head, indicating that she felt a bit embarrassed about her hair. But Arajo complimented her friend's haircut and noticed that she was wearing the bracelet she had left for her under the door during her last attempt to visit the hospital. Mijum, all beaten up, passed by the girl and gave her a sidelong glance while Era informed that he was also in the new class with them. Sejin turned to an empty desk and asked if she could sit there, but Era warned her that it was Yujin's Spot, the tough girl of the class who usually left after roll call. But on that specific day, the tough girl had stayed home, and lying on a mat wrapped in bandages, she was recovering from the last battle. Yojin felt her ear itch and was sure someone was talking about her. Then suddenly her phone vibrated just as she had closed her eyes to take another nap, and she saw that Miss Young had replied to her message, informing her that he was at school, which made the girl deduce that the boy was a machine. She turned on the mat, staring at the card they received from the brute, and blamed herself for missing roll call. But that name, Club, 6-Shot, written in gold on the red card, piqued her curiosity. At school, Suryang was incredulous to see Sejin, the school's artist, in the classroom and said he almost didn't recognize her because of her hair. Then he approached and teased her, asking how her head was, but Arajo, noticing the boy's foolishness, suggested to her friend that they go somewhere else. It was then that the annoying boy saw the scar on Sejin's neck and commented on how horrible it was, simulating empathy for her pain. The girl began to lose her patience as the boy wouldn't stop talking nonsense about the moment he ran to save himself on the day of the incident. And with the most shameless face in the world, he even mentioned that she shouldn't feel bad since she had survived. That was the breaking point for Sejin, who was still learning to control her instincts, and her eyes shone as if the monster within her was about to explode. Mizung's senses activated, detecting the presence of an enemy. However, suddenly, Arajo delivered a right cross to Su Yang, and the boy had no time to react to the blow. His glasses flew off his face and landed on the ground, declaring the KO. Sejin struggled to control her rage, which would culminate in revealing what she had become. And Arjo, furious, shouted at Suryang that he should kneel and beg for forgiveness for his behavior. Reminding the boy that he had pushed Sejin to save his own life, she ordered him to apologize to her friend immediately. Suryang widened her eyes, perhaps out of shame as she recalled the fateful day, and scratching her cheek from the force of the blow, she made her apology. The boy picked up the glasses from the floor and distanced himself, grumbling, while Miss Ang watched her friends support each other after the incident. But our protagonist felt the presence of danger lurking in the classroom once again. He looked in the direction of the girls, realizing it wasn't exactly as if an insectoid was there, but his perception pointed to Sejin as something mysterious and harmful. It was as if the girl exuded an irregular and dangerous aura to everyone. Meanwhile, on the train where the insectoid had made a feast, its transformation, which resembled a disgusting and giant caterpillar, consumed its vast banquet, until the doors of the carriage opened and an agent from the insect reapers appeared ready to do his job. This was Ko, a member of the combat unit known as the Local Brothers, who cautiously entered the carriage with his machine gun in hand, taking in the mess. The disgusting creature moved with its fang-like tongue, ready to attack anyone in front of it. Ko was astonished by the creature's form and asked if the other team member accompanying him was seeing what he had found. The other member, his older brother Lo, entered the carriage with his scimitar in hand and judged that the creature looked like a larva. The brothers conversed, trying to understand what it was, while the bizarre creature moved aggressively, surrounded by the agents. Lo informed that they shouldn't kill it, but rather capture it for scientists to discover its origin. Then suddenly, the creature turned to the older brother and attacked him with its fangs bared. But Ko promptly plunged a laser blade into the creature's neck, which reared up in pain. The agent immediately positioned his machine gun and fired mercilessly at the monster. Lo, observing his brother's movements, reminded him that they should take the creature in good condition for analysis. And violently, he felt the animal's tail hit his chest, sending him flying several meters back, crashing against the door that separated the carriages. Lo lay sprawled among the shattered glass, unable to get up immediately from the force of the impact, and Ko shouted for his brother, worried about the damage he might have suffered. The creature turned to the younger brother, determined to devour him. But the guy was tough and informed that the big creature would need more than that to take him down. And with extreme strength, he lifted the giant larva, roaring that he wasn't weak like his older brother. That's when Lo recovered and jumped onto the creature, slicing it in half with his blade. Ko held the half of the creature as if it were a tree trunk, and Lo sarcastically asked who the weak one was now. While cleaning himself, the younger brother commented on what had happened with the narrative of taking the monster in good condition. But for Lo, given the circumstances, half of the creature was already more than enough. Then the older brother spotted something that impressed him. A small yellow larva emerged from the creature and began to crawl on the floor until it turned to the agents as if staring at them with its 5 red eyes. Then suddenly, it leaped onto Lo, who felt his forehead pushed back by the attack of that small worm. The agent began to tremble and writhe while the younger brother tried to figure out what was happening. Lo suddenly informed that he was fine, but the larva was moving inside his forehead as if controlling his actions, and thus the man indicated that they should return to the laboratory. Surrounded by gray, jagged mountains, a large building rose with unique architecture where Sector B of the Insect Reapers operated, a spacious place where various employees moved about, aware of their duties. And it was to this building that the Local Brothers brought the remnants of that giant larva, certain that the doctor would be surprised by the find. Then someone jokingly said that the old doctor was dying, and Ko looked to the side somewhat suspiciously. Tae and Sam were near the corridor with their dirty clothes, and although they already knew about the larva they had captured, they felt happy to find the Local Brothers. Ko stopped in front of Tae and said they could have arrived faster if they hadn't stopped along the way, and the latter wanted to know why they did so during work. He also asked ironically why the larva was cut in half and made a joke that they had found the burden too heavy. Then Sam started to laugh when his partner informed that they arrived at the building with their giant larva in perfect condition. Lo dragged his half without saying anything and deliberately bumped into Ta, who made a point of boasting about his own team at the expense of the brothers. The Ta stick fell to the ground with a shove, and the agents looked at the man who didn't take the joke well, so Ko informed that he remained silent the entire trip. In the dissection lab, other agents were working on the whole larva, while talking about the other monster that the Local Brothers had captured. The scientists analyzed the yellow larva, holding it with tweezers, noting how bizarre it was, and then poured it into a container that held a green liquid. At school, the students were paying attention in class until the bell rang, signaling the end of another school day. Then everyone started to say their goodbyes while Sejin packed her materials without any sign of hurry. Arajo approached her friend and asked if she was going home, and Sejin looked at her without saying anything. To try to revive old habits, Arajo suggested that they go for a snack, and so they arrived at a place called Hot Pot. A beautiful meal lay steaming on the tray, and Sejin stared at the dish without showing any enthusiasm. Then she asked why Miss Young had come along with them, but the boy didn't seem to care, and Arajo tried to explain his presence. The boy chewed calmly while fixing his gaze on the girl, who was also staring at him openly. Arajo, in turn, was sweating nervously, not knowing what to do in that awkward situation where the two seemed to be shooting rays at each other. She decided to break the ice by suggesting they start eating, and she tried to be funny by making rolls with her piece of meat, which didn't seem to surprise Sejin much. After the meal, the three walked down the street while Arajo recounted the day Yoojin kicked Soo-young right in the stomach. For a moment, Sejin smiled like in the old days when she had dreams and a zest for life. Then her phone rang, transforming that momentary expression of peace into a troubled look. And so she decided to say goodbye to Era, who was radiant for having gone out with her friend again. The two said their goodbyes, and Miss Ong continued walking with Arajo on their way home. As Sejin walked with her scar on her neck exposed, our protagonist followed her with his eyes, knowing that something strange loomed over the girl. Arajo and Miss Ong walked calmly, and the girl felt satisfied with her friend's progress given what she had faced, planning to go out with her again the next day. The girl remembered something and stopped for a moment. She had forgotten the hand in the history assignment that was due the next day for Sejin, so she decided to go back the way she came to deliver it, and Miss Young showed a look of concern. Arajo apologized to the boy and headed in the opposite direction, but Miss Young instinctively grabbed her by the arm. Arajo turned back with a jerk, not understanding why the boy acted that way, and Miss Young, even restrained, asked her not to go meet her friend. Sejin was on the phone talking to someone who said they were in a white car. That car soon parked, and an older man with glasses began waving with a smile plastered on his face. The girl approached, and the driver indicated for her to get into the vehicle. Then Sejin licked her lips because she knew that her next true meal was there. On the other side, Miss Young insisted that Arajo not go meet the girl and assumed that the teachers would understand her hospital situation. The sun began to set behind the couple, and Miss Young, without letting go of Era's hand, asked her to go home with him. Soo-young and his friend were returning home after class when they spotted Sejin from afar. They watched her get into the car while the four-eyed friend mocked him for the punch he took in class. They were drooling over the old man's car and wondered if that was her father. But Soo-young, still with a red cheek from the blow, informed that the girl had no father, and upon seeing her leave, he promised he would take revenge. In another part of the city, the lights of the buildings and businesses danced with a bustling night, while a pair of boots moved determinedly along the sidewalk, and the vivid blue tone of Yoojin's jacket caught the attention of those she passed. The girl ignored the curious glances, focused on her mission, and she thought that she had only dressed that way because the place she was looking for was a nightclub, but perhaps she had overdone it a bit and prayed that they wouldn't ask for her ID. It wasn't hard to find the building where the so-called club, stick-shot operated with its crimson hue and electronic sound pulsating inside like a living organism. But the girl was startled when she saw the size of the line formed by those eager to enjoy a piece of that fervent nightclub. Yoojin felt that she couldn't enter there alone, so she sent a message to Mizong, who was logically eating, but she ordered him to meet her. The girl became so desperate, not knowing whether to stay there or go home, that she didn't notice someone approaching. Then she heard a voice asking for permission and froze with her hands on her head before turning around. When she did, she noticed there was a man with red hair asking if she was there for the first time. Yoojin's eyes widened and her mind could only form the phrase, "It's him." The man with his charming demeanor commented that the girl's voice sounded familiar to him. Then he revealed himself as Minion Park, the human identity of Zigna, who awkwardly asked if they had met before. And so our girl trembled at the thought, knowing that alone in front of her tormentor, she was completely doomed. The music pulsed in the darkness as Yoojin tried to free herself from the charming man who insisted on taking her inside the nightclub against her will. Suddenly, the bright light that appeared as they advanced nearly blinded her. Yoojin slowly opened her eyes and realized what the place was: Club 6 Shot, with hundreds of people frantically entangled on the dance floor. The girl was wide-eyed next to Zigna, as she had never experienced how much the nightlife hid in its private cocoons. Her eyes glazed over, feeling drawn to the glow of the spinning disco ball that reflected all the glamour of the place. Zigna, noticing the young woman's fascination, redundantly asked if she was satisfied to have gotten in. But Yoojin only had eyes for the spinning ball and took a few steps forward, trying to touch it, as her condition as a silkworm inherently brought an attraction to light. She knew she needed to concentrate, but that light was determined to make her lose everything. Yoojin commented that she was enchanted by what she saw, and the handsome man took the opportunity to give her a basic pickup line, saying she was the most charming thing around. The girl looked at those people dancing and knew it was just a distraction to camouflage the existence of the insect court she was trying to infiltrate. So she put her hand inside her jacket and decided to take a risk since she had come this far. She pulled out the red card from her inner pocket and showed it to Zigna with a sensual air, informing him that she had received an invitation. Zigna looked at her without surprise, as if he had been expecting this moment, and from that vantage point where they observed the people, he said he would take her where the real fun happened. The man guided her through a wide corridor and warned that they were almost at their destination upon noticing the girl's restlessness. Then he pointed to the elevator they were supposed to take, which left Yujin stunned. The girl found herself in front of a massive door about 3 meters tall and asked why that elevator was so big. When the door opened, it revealed a spacious crimson area where the insector commented that they were going to a VIP area, and that's why it needed to be special. Yujin couldn't believe that elevator was bigger than her room. Then the man brought the card close to a sensor that beeped while revealing to her that they didn't extend invitations to just anyone. Zigna wanted to know how she and her boss had met, so trying to maintain her composure, Yujin replied that she usually sparked others' interest, which made the man laugh. The seductive guy curiously asked what insect she transformed into, judging by her beauty, a butterfly or a praying mantis, but Yujin joked and said she was a dung beetle. Feigning interest, she also asked about the man's form, who proudly declared he was a giant water spider, but Yujin knew it wasn't that impressive. The elevator beeped again, indicating they had arrived, and when the door began to open, the man tried to impress her with what she was about to witness. But Yujin, despite lying about her enthusiasm, imagined it would just be a boring party full of insectors. And suddenly, she found herself wide-eyed again at what she was witnessing. A crowd of humans and insectors together, shouting fervently as if they were watching something vibrant and violent. And indeed, inside an arena, a fight was breaking out between one insector and several humans with weapons in hand, for this was the true lawless frontier. The visibly excited audience shouted and cheered for their bets in that coliseum designed within the building that pulsed with the reputation of a nightclub on its surface. And while Zigna welcomed the girl to the VIP area, Yujin saw a bald man with an eye patch piercing the jugular of some random insector. It was something new for her, of all those people celebrating alongside the humans attacking the creature in the middle of the arena without compassion. The destruction showed that it was a lawless place with growls and the clinking of blades everywhere. Yujin couldn't blink, and suddenly a giant creature named Goliath Beetle appeared in the arena, ready to play. The creature let out a scream that echoed like thunder, uttering the name Zack, and began crushing the humans in its path. The insect audience shouted Zack's name as if the monster were an indestructible celebrity of that hostile world. Faced with everything she had discovered so far, Yujin could only ask why the humans were in that condition, and Zigna confessed that it was not the reaction he expected. He wanted to know if that wasn't her scene, but the girl was stunned to see humans and insectors betting together in a real battle. She could only think about how disgusting it all was while Zack, the queen of the insectors, knocked down all her opponents to the delight of the crowd present. Then Zigna explained, next to incredulous Yujin, that Queen Zack was the face of the lawless frontier, a being of unmatched strength, although there were exceptions. It was then that the giant creature let out a scream and a hole formed at the height of its stomach. From there, an orange shell emerged and prostrated itself before Zack, revealing an insector that had just inflicted serious damage on her. Zigna seemed worried upon noticing the arrival of the fighter challenging Queen Zack as if it weren't the first time he had seen him. He recalled that he had asked him to take it easy, but the insector, believing himself to be the victor, demanded his money while the audience shouted to finish off Queen Zack. Yujin commented that it was nothing but barbarism and wanted to know what the point of it all was, so Zigna decided to explain, somewhat frustrated with the girl's attitude. He said that humans were merely entertainment for the glory of the insectors while they watched the fighter celebrate his apparent victory. Yujin asked what glory he was referring to, and Zigna continued that every insector's desire was to be part of the court that commanded them. But he also explained to the girl that it wasn't that easy, as the ideology of the species carried the same weight as brute strength for those who were chosen. And Yujin stared at Zigna, presuming that he might have gone through this repugnant trial himself. Then the man commented that there was another way to associate with the insector court and pulled out the envelope containing the yellow larva that had been compromising the humans. He handed it to Yujin, who still didn't know about the existence of that profane method. It was then that a voice called for Zigna at the moment of his approach. An insector butler informed him that the boss was waiting for him in his office, and Zigna, visibly distressed, complained that the man had scared his client. He then turned to Yujin, intending to finish that peculiar conversation. But the girl had already moved closer to the elevator, with the perfect excuse to leave that place. And Zigna watched her leave, not understanding the reason for her behavior. He asked where the girl was going, and Yujin lied, saying she needed to go to the bathroom. Then the door closed before he could stop her. Yujin slumped in the elevator, feeling powerless in light of everything she had discovered, and vowed to kill Mizong for leaving her to act alone in the investigation. Zigna was frustrated with his failed attempt, and while trying to process the failure, the butler alerted him that the boss was waiting for him. And that was the last straw for Zigna, who without hesitation, with one swift movement, decapitated the employee to send his head elsewhere. Then, seeing his hand dirty with the man's internal liquid, he impatiently replied that he was already going. The next day, the school awoke with its students arriving little by little, and Yujin, visibly exhausted, leaned against the classroom door with a face that suggested she had faced a difficult night. She shouted Mizong's name, who looked at her while sucking on a lollipop near the window. Without thinking twice, the girl kicked in the direction of our protagonist, who dodged with little difficulty. She threw other blows with her bag, and Miss Young evaded them all while listening to her rant indignantly about him not having come to meet her the night before. After the futile attempts, the girl put her hands on her knees out of breath and said that she had obtained important information for our sweet-toothed devourer. However, two students were gossiping at their desks, and Yojin looked back, asking if something different was happening. At that moment, Arjo and Sejin entered the classroom, and murmurs arose from all sides about something disgusting and unusual. Arjo noticed that all the students were looking in her and her friend's direction, making mocking comments and not understanding the tense atmosphere. She wanted to know what was happening. Arjo couldn't comprehend what was troubling them so early. The entire class practically cast judgmental glances at Sejin, with whispers accusing her of dating an older man. Arjo glanced at her friend, waiting for her reaction when someone said that the class artist was selling her body. Sejin stepped forward because the students were crossing the line, but she was held back by Arjo, who was still trying to understand the other's behavior. From the back of the class, Yujin observed the unusual scene and asked who the pretty girl was, to which Miss Young replied that she was Arjo's friend. Yujin, noticing the tension, commented that there wasn't a day without surprises at that school, but Miss Young remained attentive to the events. And despite his calm expression, our boy even broke the stick in his mouth because he knew something was about to spiral out of control. Arjo, who didn't want trouble, tried to get Sejin out of the classroom, calling her to leave that hostile territory. However, a voice asked where the darlings were going. It was Su-young, who was framing a camera with her fingers and claimed to have evidence of a possible scandal she wanted to reveal. Then, in front of everyone to embarrass Sejin, she recounted seeing her getting into a fancy car with an older man, whom the friend next to her assumed was her father. However, Su-young, as if she were a storyteller of sensational tales, informed that the girl had no father and began to laugh, drawing her own conclusions. The girls continued to listen as Su-young deduced that the old man was a pervert, and since he was the boy with the bravery medal, he needed to dig deeper. So she continued that she took a taxi to follow her and showed her friends the screen of her phone, which had Sejin, the class artist, entering a hotel with the old man. And for that reason, she made an inquisitive face in front of the entire class and declared that it was a total tragedy. The boy glared at Sejin and warned in a threatening tone that it would be better for her not to blame him for ruining her future career as an artist. And rubbing her foam in her face, Stu-young said she had the necessary evidence to hinder her success. Sejin stared at him from behind the phone while absorbing the information. Yojin, losing patience, commented that the clown was already making her nauseous and seemed ready to deal with him again. It was then that Miss Young had the feeling that danger was imminent once more. And Arjo, who seemed to gather all her strength, approached Su-young to ask what the point of all that spectacle was. Then she again readied her right cross to knock out the gossip monger, who merely waited for the blow to hit him squarely in the cheek. But suddenly, Sejin restrained Arjo, demonstrating a balance that perhaps even she hadn't expected. And she approached her friend, whispering something inaudible that made Era's eyes widen. Then Sejin took a few steps back, asking her friend to stay outside the classroom. Arjo stared at her in confusion, but Sejin was sure she could handle the situation on her own. And so she closed the door, leaving Era in the external corridor to protect her from what was to come. Meanwhile, Su-young's friend considered that the boy had escaped another beating, and Sejin stared at the door without looking at the students. It was then that, after a brief silence, Sejin began to laugh loudly and sarcastically commented that she wished she could have stayed a little longer there. But that statement left Miss Young anxious, as if he knew the next steps of that situation that Yojin had not yet perceived, especially the gossiping boys, who deduced it was just an attack of madness coming from Sejin. Su-young's friend decided to approach her and apologize for the trolling. But without the intention of being sincere, he whispered in Sejin's ear how much she was charging for her services. Sejin felt the weight of the boy's hand on her shoulder, and as he continued to spout nonsense, the larva began to take over her being. The boy, who had no idea of the danger he was getting into, continued to mock the girl. And Sejin turned around, presenting the ongoing insect transformation process with multiple red, hungry eyes on her forehead. Yojin and Miss Young were incredulous at the revelation, as they knew exactly what would happen next. Meanwhile, Su-young's friend nearly wet his pants upon witnessing Sejin's macabre metamorphosis before him. Then Sejin, with just a movement of her arms, landed a punch on the boy's face, sending him flying backward, knocked out. Su-young screamed, informing everyone that the girl was an insectoid, and Sejin stared at the boy with eyes that seemed to say, "You are next." A commotion erupted, and the students began to run around the classroom, screaming in panic. Sejin watched them all as if they were pigs ready for slaughter, almost relishing in that futile movement. So she simply made her arms stretch as if it were an extension branch of her limbs and prevented one of the students from escaping. Arjo, who was outside, heard the screams and imagined what was happening inside as the legs of a desk broke through the concrete wall. Sejin had locked the door with the chair precisely to prevent Arjo from entering, who was shouting her friend's name outside. The room was now entirely hers, and none of the students would be able to escape her attack, her power. The time for revenge had come. One of the students screamed hysterically that the door was blocked and asked the heavens how they would get out of that situation. Our heroes knew they had to prevent that imminent carnage, but also pondered whether to reveal themselves in front of so many eyes. But Sejin seemed focused on his single prey and called Suryang, who was desperately typing on her phone, perhaps trying for one more post for likes. Sejin's voice became dark and she called him imperatively, "Come here." When he heard his name, the boy whispered to the others to quickly contact the Bug Reapers. But the students were so scared that they took a step back, leaving Suryang completely vulnerable before the insectress. Sejin then lunged her elastic arm toward the boy, grabbing him by the neck. He dropped the phone to the ground upon impact as he felt Sejin's fingers suffocating him and heard her scream that he was responsible for ruining her life. She grew increasingly furious, her transformation completing as she repeated that he was to blame. Then her fang-like tongue emerged and lunged at the boy, ready to devour him. Suryang saw that red, venomous snake approaching her face, leaving her with no chance of survival. But a voice from the students shouted, "That's enough." And the snake's tongue stopped a few centimeters from Suryang's face, who felt the breath of death close to her. Mizong had stepped forward among the students and, with his cold and imposing demeanor in such cases, told Sejin to stop what she was doing. Our boy approached while saying that if she went any further, she would no longer have Arajo's friendship, as if he were seeking the more conscious part of Sejin that still resided within her. At that moment, Arajo banged on the door, trying to get in to see what was happening, and Sejin was locked in an internal struggle as she looked to the side. Arajo was desperate, almost breaking down the door, and a teacher appeared in the hallway, startled by the situation. Despite the agony in his face being almost purple from asphyxiation, the celebrity boy still found the strength to curse Sejin as a disgusting insect. And showing a courage not yet seen in the boy, he directed someone to call for help because she was going to finish off everyone present. But the students ignored Suyang's plea out of a cowardice that overshadowed their concern for the friend who was agonizing the creature's hands. The boy cursed everyone while Sejin lifted him, but without returning her focus, she turned her frustration toward Misong, insulting him while simultaneously asking for help. Misong stared at the boy who was begging for them to call the Reapers and knew that not even Suyang deserved to end like this. Sejin was amused by the boy's desperation behind her multiple crazed eyes. Then she called Misong and confessed that she wouldn't be able to resist the urge to devour Suyang. And looking at our protagonist, she asked Misong to take care of Arajo. It was then that suddenly her extensible arm tightened harder around Suyang, and she asked him to listen to her carefully. Sejin remembered every moment of the incident when the boy, fleeing from the insectress, simply pushed her back, thinking only of saving his own life, and that he still came out as the hero of the day in front of reporters for having called the Bug Reapers. But in the dark hospital room, alone all that time while she recovered, the desire for revenge against the cowardly and selfish boy grew within Sejin, and she imagined him enjoying an unpunished, full life at school that had been denied to her. Sejin felt alone, unable to imagine Suyang laughing and having fun. Her tears were the only witnesses to her pain, and when she gathered the strength to return, she still had to deal with the judgments of that infamous boy who didn't know half of what she had been through. Sejin then concluded that Suyang had dug his own grave and confessed that she didn't feel bad about having to end him once and for all. Then the girl brought her arm to her backpack and revealed that she wouldn't end the boy's life without pain. Suddenly, Sejin's hand was filled with yellow larvae, and she promised that she would make Suyang suffer as she had. Our heroes lay in wait, and Misong wondered what that was, but Yojin already had an idea. Sejin's insect-like hand grabbed Suyang by the cheek, forcing him to open his mouth. And with determination, she informed him that she would only grant him death at the height of his suffering. Suyang, who was on the ground, tried to push her away with his legs, but Sejin's strength was overwhelming. Desperate, the boy begged for his life, wishing to know why she was doing this while his mouth was forced open against his will. The boy's glasses reflected that disgusting larva, and they cascaded down into his mouth. A sense of wickedness overtook Sejin as she ordered the boy to swallow it all. Suyang felt those creatures consume his body as his veins began to bulge involuntarily. His body exhibited the usual shock that this process caused while the pain consumed him entirely. The number of larvae was so absurd that Suyang began to transform rapidly, his body stretching in all directions. The students were perplexed by what they saw next to Yujin, who was somewhat stunned, and he remembered Zigna with the same larva in hand the night before. Suyin writhed as he took on a bizarre form, but Sejin watched in ecstasy as the boy no longer responded for himself, and relaxed beside him. She wanted to know how he felt about becoming what he so despised. Sejin had a relieved expression and judged that this was the boy's true form due to his lack of empathy for others. It was then that someone knocked harder on the door and ordered it to be opened, and Misong, who was observing everything, felt helpless as he did not want to reveal his secret identity. The school principal threatened that the students should open it immediately, and Arajo waited with the feeling that a great danger was looming over everyone in the classroom. Sejin stared at Misong and said he would like to say goodbye to Era, but assumed it would be better to never speak to his friend again. And with sincerity and even deep sadness, The girl commented that now she was an enemy of humanity. Then she threw her body back through the window and left the school, aware that she would never be the pop star she had always dreamed of. Miss-Am watched her leave but did not move, and as she flew through the window, the chair that had been blocking the classroom door came loose and fell on the unconscious student near the entrance. He woke up somewhat dazed with a swollen cheek as the door opened. The principal stormed in, shouting alongside Era, but the student on the floor was more concerned with the monster in front of him that growled and grunted grotesquely in front of everyone. The principal was stunned to realize that another insectoid was in his school, and the student who had just woken up mistakenly reported that it was Senjin, which made Arajo's eyes widen in disbelief. Despite the chaos, the boy grabbed his phone and shouted that it was his turn to earn a bravery medal. But Arajo snatched the device from the boy's hand in an attempt to protect her friend's privacy. Ara and the boy practically fought over who would keep the phone while he explained that they should call the insect reapers. Then the device slipped, and that movement seemed to catch the attention of the bizarre creature that Suyang had transformed into. The phone was on speaker and completed the call to the reapers, where someone on the other end asked how they could help. The voice on the line informed that it was directed to the department reporting the presence of an insectoid. Then Suyang, in his grotesque form, began to regain his consciousness, and he became tense when he realized that the silhouette of his shadow was misshapen. It was then that he approached the window and saw the reflection of his monstrous face in disbelief. The boy, now a larva, broke the glass of the window in fury, but the shards scattered on the floor confirmed something he had never imagined. He was an insectoid. In despair and rage, Suyang began to flail his enormous limbs in an attempt to rid himself of that bizarre appearance, and he started to destroy everything around him without concern for the students in the classroom. Arajo remained paralyzed, still processing the chaos that was engulfing her class. And without the strength to defend herself, she barely saw when Mizon threw himself to protect her from the attack of that enraged creature. Sudiang could not accept his new reality and screamed to the heavens that it was all just a dream. The beast stuck its head out of the window and leaped aimlessly, knowing that if the Reapers found him, they would kill him. So he simply ran with one thing in mind: he needed to survive. In the classroom, everything was destroyed, and the students slowly began to recover from that hurricane. Mizon heard a sob and looked at Arajo, who let her tears fall down her face without shame, imagining that that larva was Seijin. Our boy had no strength to construct any phrase that could comfort her, and then he looked in the direction of Yu Jin, who was also staring at him. There was no time for lamentation, and so our heroes set off in pursuit of Seijin, knowing she was involved with the insect court. Yu Jin showed the pill with the larva she had won at the club and explained that it was one of the ways to enter the insector's inner circle. They were so focused on finding Seijin that they spoke in unison to follow each other's path, and when they realized that the insect perception power indicated the same place, they simply started running as fast as they could. But when they arrived at the indicated location, they noticed that Seijin was not there. It was then that they realized both the GPS and Silk's rope pointed to an abandoned construction site. Seijin was standing alone in front of the rubble that seemed to be from an abandoned building. Then she heard someone call her name and turned around after wiping her tear-filled eyes. Misong and Yu Jin approached the girl, wanting to speak in a peaceful tone. But our heroes heard a harsh voice in the air asking if they were the ones who had made Seijin cry. The girl looked at the invisible person comforting her and tried to explain who the newcomers were. But the gothic woman dropped her camouflage and, interrupting Seijin, spoke in an intimidating tone that she didn't like when someone messed with her own. Then she glared at our heroes and more aggressively asked again which of the two had made her baby cry. At that moment, Yu Jin tried to ease the tension and explain that they only wanted to talk to Seijin, and the girl looked at her mentor with an expression that she didn't want a war with her classmates. It was then that suddenly Hannah, the gothic insector, disappeared before everyone, using her camouflage ability again. Then quick footsteps echoed on the sandy ground, and our heroes began to look around. And Hannah suddenly reappeared, delivering a flying kick to Mizon at stomach height. The boy slid back a few meters from the blow, and the woman, not in the mood for games, clenched her fists, preparing another strike, this time towards Yu Jin, who only had time to cross her arms to block the punch. But the woman softened the blow and stared at Yu Jin as if admiring her up close. And she gave up on attacking the girl because she understood it would be a waste to kill her at that moment. Then she quickly positioned herself behind our heroine and bit her ear as if marking her territory or something like that. But Yu Jin moved to free herself from Hannah, questioning what she was doing, and the woman jumped back. The gothic woman wiped her mouth after the ear sucking and was surprised to realize that the girl was also an insector. Hannah's act left Yu Jin furious because not just anyone could come and suck on her ear, and so she summoned her threads to attack the woman. Hannah dodged the attack, judging that the girl's silk bub form was not bad at all. Then she concluded that Misong was also an insector, and our boy was already wearing his aunt's suit, ready to attack. It was then that he delivered a hammer strike, but the woman was of remarkable speed and easily dodged. Our protagonist looked back in disbelief, and Hannah warned him that he would never be able to hit her with those punches. And imposing behind her sensual outfit, she explained to our young hero that using invisibility was her ability. Our heroes, already in their armor, discussed how to hit the enemy, and Sejin's eyes widened as she realized that Miseong was also an insector. Always impulsive, our ant charged into the offensive, and the woman, who seemed to detect his movements, showed a bit of annoyance at the boy's attack. But she didn't notice when Yujin's webs wrapped around her neck, and suddenly the woman found herself surrounded by 1,000 silk rings and an ant hopping in front of her. Hannah remained still in the face of the attacks and considered the young people's assault somewhat disrespectful. But Miseong didn't care about the woman's judgments and ferociously delivered a thunderous punch to her face that made the insector spit blood from the impact. Then she realized she needed to act and revealed her pointed weapon that resembled a stinger. And furious that the ant had made her bleed, she launched a piercing attack at Miseong. Our protagonist felt that tip pierced through his armor, but Hannah noticed something unusual for an insector. And while her weapon invaded Miseong's chest, she questioned why our hero's blood was red. Yujin rushed forward upon seeing Miseong injured and ran towards the opponent to confront her. But the woman noticed the girl's movements and aimed the gauntlet of her other arm in her direction. Then she shot her stinger, which extended like a spear, and hit our heroine squarely. Hannah's precise attack pierced Yujin's shoulder, causing supreme pain to course through her body. She licked the tip she had introduced into Miseong, savoring the taste of human liquid. However, our heroes began to feel the affected area swell as if their bodies had reacted to the poison. Then Hannah ordered, "Detonate." And the protrusions that had appeared on our fighters simply exploded as if grenades had been embedded in their skin. Both Miseong and Yujin were increasingly certain that battles against members of the insect court would be nearly impossible to win. Noticing the heroes' pause in attacks, the woman scoffed, judging them to be tired. For her, the game was just beginning. Sejin tried to intervene, placing herself between her classmates and her new tutor, lying that they were her clients. Yujin and Miseong were stunned, but Sejin's intention was to convince the woman that the heroes were there to check the larva pill. Hannah leaned over Sejin to verify the truth of her words, but the girl remained firm in her narrative. A look of disappointment lingered on Hannah's face, perhaps because she was enjoying the clash, or perhaps because she sensed a lie in her new pupil. But soon that aura dissipated and she smiled at the information, commenting that Sejin shouldn't have warned her earlier. Then she skipped away, finding it amusing that she had almost killed our heroes. However, there was the problem that the woman only had one pill in stock, but our heroes tried to buy time by asking for a bit more information about the product, and Hannah, as a good businesswoman in the field, explained that by consuming the little medicine, they would become stronger insectors. Sejin, who was listening to the information, discovered that humans transformed into larvae, but an insector eating the human larva would become even stronger. Yujin appeared troubled by the information, but that was exactly what the woman meant: eat, become strong. Then two humans practicing cardio approached the insectors, and for Hannah, that was more than perfect for a practical demonstration. She called the boys as they ran by and easily convinced one of them to take the pill. Soon the young man began to feel the reactions and transform into a giant larva. Our heroes felt powerless once again as another human transformed before their eyes, and Hannah, wanting to apologize to Sejin's so-called clients, gave the green light for them to feed on the larva and become even more powerful. Then she wished Ardu a good meal while the creature writhed in its metamorphosis process. She left with Sejin, informing them that if they wanted more, they could find her at Club 6 Shot. Sejin glanced back and saw Miseong running without a second thought toward the larva, while Yujin tried to convince him not to do what she feared he would do. But larva, in turn, was more interested in what had once been its friend, who was screaming desperately for help. Then our hero delivered a hook reminiscent of Nendi's games, severing the creature's head from its body, still with its mouth open, hungry for flesh. He then smashed the creature, driving it into the ground. Yujin's eyes widened as she realized that Miseong was obsessed with the dead larva before him. And while our protagonist prepared to launch his ants at the feast, the girl frantically tried to stop him. The citizen who saw his friend turn into a monster and suddenly be torn apart by the ant observed in shock as the insectors debated whether to eat or not eat. That was the question. But Miseong felt he needed to test the larva to know the reality of the power mentioned by Hannah. So he commanded his sisters, celebration. And the ants left his body, heading toward the creature voraciously. The celebration had begun, and Yujin was indignant at Miseong's attitude. But our protagonist remained still, watching his ants finish the job. The citizen was in shock as all those insects consumed his friend. Yujin tried to argue that the boy could wait since there were still human traces in the victim's consciousness, but Miseong replied curtly that he was no longer human. Indignant, Yujin said that it was wrong and that Miseong was behaving like the other insectors in the pursuit of power. Then she compared him to the members of the insect court, and the boy looked at her seriously, asking her to shut up and watch. The distraught citizen also watched the scene, not understanding anything of the dialogue between our heroes. Meanwhile, the girl waited curiously about what patient Miseong was trying to do. Yujin's eyes widened in disbelief as she realized that the victim was returning to his natural form. As the ants crawled over his body, his features began to show signs of a possible detransformation. Little by little, the victim was shedding his larval form and incorporating human anatomy, even groaning in pain. Miseong watched everything attentively, hoping that his idea would work, and Yoo-jin wanted more information about the process. Then our boy explained that he had also felt that unstable presence in Sejin. The victim was still writhing, but it was already possible to see him returning to normal. It was then that suddenly the larva he had swallowed began to be expelled from his mouth with the help of the ants. Little by little, it completely left the boy's interior. Our heroes continued to observe the ants consume the larva that had come out of the pill, and while they feasted, Yoo-jin wondered if this could influence him. But our protagonist would only have the answer when they returned to his body. And so, when they finished that small meal, they marched in a line into Mizong. Suddenly, our boy felt something strange inside him. Yoo-jin was frightened by the way Mizong trembled and grunted. Then, worried about what might happen, he ordered the girl to step back as soon as possible. And Mizong felt an immense pain radiate through his body, unsure if he could contain that sensation. The pounding bass echoed on another night at the famous club, Six Shot. While the sound was muffled by a glass wall in a spacious room where a relaxed man poured a bottle of champagne surrounded by women and a security guard. The man pulled his mouth away from the bottle and imperatively authorized that the woman be allowed to enter. Complaining about the procedure, Hana appeared accompanied by Sejin, stating that she didn't need permission to be there. But the giant, surrounded by beautiful girls and known as Dajun Gong, retorted that he was the boss of that joint and deserved respect. However, the woman didn't seem to take much notice and went straight to the bucket to grab a bottle of sparkling wine. Hana, feeling at ease, poured the bottle into her mouth without any shame and then offered it to Sejin, who declined, remaining composed. The big guy, noticing a wound on Hana's arm, asked if she had been in a fight, but the woman curtly replied that it was just business. But she commented that young people are aggressive, so the brute suggested they be invited to participate in the lawless frontier arena, and Hana asked why he would do that. And Dajun, while receiving food in his mouth, said there was a troublemaker in the arena, but Hana, who didn't seem interested in the subject, wanted to know why she was called there. The man, a bit more brusque, informed her that 50 pills of the larva had gone missing from the stock the day before. And incredulous, Hana asked if he had been robbed, while Sejin behind the woman made a worried face. Then Dajun leaned back on his sofa and warned that Hana shouldn't judge his management because he knew who was to blame. Suddenly, the giant lunged towards Sejin, and his hand was so large that it almost engulfed the girl's head. The impact of the blow was so absurd that it shattered the glass ceiling of the nightclub where people were dancing. But the man didn't care, and while pressing Sejin's head against the wall, he accused her of stealing the products. And at the peak of his fury, Dajun called Sejin a disposable little animal and swore he would chew her up without leaving a single piece. But suddenly, he felt Hana's stinger pointed close to his face. Then the two women who were fawning over the giant also revealed their weapons, ready to defend him. The atmosphere in the room became tense, and suddenly everyone was at a Mexican standoff. But Hana threatened Dajun if he did anything to her pupil. And the man, with the gothic woman around his neck, assumed she wanted to let Sejin go unpunished. Sejin felt the giant's thick fingers pressing against her head while she saw him trying to extract her confession. The man, without measuring the consequences, squeezed Sejin's face harder, and Hana, without hesitation, drove her stinger into the brute's neck. The woman was determined and pressed the tip of her weapon deeper, while the man in turn crushed Sejin's head harder. Then the girl, feeling her head almost explode, screamed Suyeon's name and confessed that she made the boy swallow all the pills out of revenge. The giant began to laugh and, looking into Sejin's eyes, felt upset by the end of the game. Unbothered by the stinger in his neck, the man revealed that he already knew what had happened to the pills, and Sejin's eyes widened in fear. Then Dajun loosened his grip and released the girl, who fell to the ground and was supported by her mentor. The man laughed and judged Sejin to be more clumsy than her owner. But the girl was still in shock about how he knew about the pills, and Hana asked why Dajun acted that way if he already had the truth. Then the giant, surrounded by his guardians, explained that he had placed someone to follow Sejin when he discovered what she was up to. And he licked his lips at the thought that a human had ingested 50 pills, warning that this one was his. A little distance away, Squad C of the Reapers was chasing an insect larva. It was Suyeon, desperately wagging his tail to escape faster, while the agents noticed that this larva was different from the others. The monster boy looked back, trying to gauge the distance, but was quickly intercepted by the Reapers, who attacked him mercilessly. Suyeon grunted as the blades pierced his carcass and asked the heavens why fate had reserved such an end for him. Pio, who was on the front line, struck with his sword, and the creature fell, receiving a high-voltage shock. He felt satisfied to have silenced that whiny monster without making it clear, puffing on his repellent little cigarette. Pio also commented on how noisy that larva was and ordered his team to carry the creature to the laboratory. But before the agents could start bagging the monster, a strong wind began to form in the area, and Pio looked back, trying to understand what was happening that was abnormal in the region. The Reaper team couldn't control their feet and realized they were all being sucked in by the strong wind. But Pio noticed the presence of two strangers and, with his imposing demeanor, wanted to know who the intruders were. And to his misfortune, it was Zigna, who ordered someone with his half-smile to grab the package as he was very strong. This someone, absorbing the chief's order, was sure that the moment to fight had arrived. Then a crouched boy revealed himself next to Zigna, eager to quickly fulfill his mission. The wind produced by the boy created quicksand that trapped some agents. Then Pio sheathed his sword, which, when locked in the scabbard, lit up a red light on the Reaper's emblem. Zigna and the boy were curious about the man's behavior, and seeing him smoke his little cigarette nonchalantly, they wondered why he wasn't fighting. The man took a puff upward, and one of his team members shouted, "Sir!" The desperate bald agents said they were being sucked in too quickly, and therefore had little time. The leader of Squad C then looked ahead and wondered why an antlion was different from the larva they were pursuing. Then the emblem of the Reapers on the sword's scabbard turned green as if indicating it was ready to be used, and Pio, staring at the insectors, was eager to discover the difference. The insect boy stared back at Pio, trying to understand why the man wasn't helping his agents and underestimated his strength. The members of the Reapers continued to be buried and scream in distress, until Zigna raised his eyebrows in astonishment, and Pio made a movement with the sword, revealing that the weapon was also a rifle. The leader of Squad C aimed at the insectors, who didn't understand the sword's new function, and when Zigna warned the boy to be careful, a burst of electricity struck the boy's head. The boy began to thrash about from the high voltage of the attack, and Zigna, furious, let his water spider form show. The leader of the Reapers advanced toward the enemies with the weapon in hand and unleashed another electric discharge toward the insectors, but Zigna blocked the attack, this time with his powerful flaming blade. But something the insector didn't expect happened. Zigna couldn't deflect that discharge and thus felt the high voltage coursing through his body as well. The agents noticed that the ground was stopping sucking them in after their leader's assaults and saw Pio running over the hostile ground, informing that the insectors were there for the larva, so he ordered them to recover it at any cost. Pio and Zigna were face to face, and their blades clashed as they began a high-caliber duel. The Reaper praised Zigna's flaming sword, and thus they dueled, but the insector wasn't in the mood for jokes. And pulling his other sword from his back, he suggested that the man not boast just because he had a few cheap tricks. Zigna then demonstrated that he also had his own tricks for Pio to deal with, and he delivered a sideways strike with his blade that left an orange trail until it clashed again with the Reaper's sword. Pio tried to contain the attack, but the strength of that insector was impressive, and he felt that his arms wouldn't be able to resist for much longer, perhaps due to a lack of breath from the little cigarette, right? But then he showed another trick and inhaled as much smoke as his lungs could handle, and he blew a puff of smoke in Zigna's face, which looked like a fog machine for killing mosquitoes. I think that's rude, but it was fair game there. Zigna felt the smoke in his nostrils as if it were a poisonous insecticide gas. He made quick movements with his blades to dissipate the heavy air. The smoke began to clear, and the insects started to cough to expel any particles he had inhaled. But then he realized that his opponent had vanished from in front of him. He was caught off guard from the left flank by a frontal attack from Pio, who wielded his electrified sword. Zigna glared at the Reaper and insulted him as arrogant while the shock coursed through his body. But Pio was determined to take the member of the insect court along with the larva on his mission, until he felt something strange beneath his foot. He jumped back as the ground projected upward like a thorn to attack him unawares. Then 5 glowing eyes began to emerge from the ground as if it were a sand kraken full of tentacles. But the agents of Squad C blocked the creature's advance with their weapons drawn. It was then that a red arrow shot up from the sand and struck one of the agents suddenly, leaving him no chance to defend himself. Pio watched that spear pierce the man's body and open up with sharp fangs. It then lifted the agent's body into the air and swallowed him whole beneath the earth. Then the Reapers of Squad C noticed that the ground was starting to suck them back in, and Zigna wondered if his partner had stopped pretending to be dead. The creature emerged from the ground with his broken helmet, complaining. It asked who the four-eyed one was while revealing itself as Mercer, the antlion larva of the insect court. Mercer told Zigna that they were running out of time and needed to retrieve the larva of Suyan, who was also buried. So Zigna sheathed his swords on his back and ordered them to return to the club. Pio heard Zigna mention the club and wondered what he was referring to. Meanwhile, the agents shouted that the enemies were trying to escape. Then the leader of Squad C brandished his sword rifle, aiming at the insects. However, he noticed that the weapon's battery was dead. Squad C realized that the buildings around them were collapsing. Then the voice of the antlion commanded the ground to sink, causing the structure of everything around to start shaking. And with everything falling apart, the Reapers decided to flee the area before they were hit. But Pio ran in the opposite direction while the agents begged him not to do that. Zigna noticed the man's movement and scoffed at such insolence. And while the squad leader dodged the debris, the antlion seemed irritated by the man's insistence. The insect manipulated rocks and mud towards Pio, who was ultimately saved by the bald agent who was still alive. The creature submerged back into the sandy terrain and threatened that if it saw Pio again, it would kill him. This time, the man did not attack and watched as the creature disappeared into the ground. Pio and his agents remained still, perhaps frustrated by the failure of the mission. Then he ordered his men to investigate every nightclub in the area because he was going to start the hunt. The tracks of the black ant lingered over the dark night that was beginning. Meanwhile, an insect with cockroach traits was running at full speed. And to make matters worse, our hero seemed to be on its tail. But the creature, which had not yet noticed our protagonist's presence, was startled when it looked back and saw the imposing figure that was usually called the relative killer. The insect, appearing desperate, begged Mizong to stop following it, until it noticed some ants walking across its face. The black ant was in front of it, ready to execute another celebration. But something caught our protagonist's attention even before he could give the order, and the cockroach insect looked back and saw that another ant was slowly approaching. Incredulous, it questioned the presence of two relative killers, but it had no time to get an answer as it lay on the ground, and the dew of ants faced each other in the stillness of the night. Another calm day at school after another insect incident, and Arajo was deep in thought, sitting at her desk. At another table, there was a posthumous tribute to Su-yang, but some students did not consider him deserving and thus wrote monster beneath his name. And Su-yang's friend, who took a punch from Sejin, was more concerned about the tooth he lost on the day of the commotion. On the other hand, Arajo and Yoo-jin remained silent, standing in their places listening to the other girls gossip until one called Sejin a monster. And suddenly, the girls heard someone deny the information as retaliation. Arajo had stood up and came to her friend's defense, emphasizing that Sejin was not a monster. Yoo-jin's eyes widened as she observed the girl's attitude and concluded that she was bolder than she thought. Then Arajo returned to her place amidst the murmurs of the students behind her. Yoo-jin felt worried and asked if everything was okay with Era, who replied curtly, yes. Arajo was still confused about what had happened and decided to ask Yoo-jin if her friend had really turned into a monster. Then Yoo-jin replied that Sejin hadn't harmed anyone else besides Su-yang and expressed her opinion that she wasn't a monster. Arajo twisted her lips and, even understanding Yoo-jin's point of view, confessed that she had been terrified. She looked at Yoo-jin for the first time and with tears in her eyes commented that when she heard the screams, she could have looked out the classroom window but felt she didn't have the strength to do so. Then she vented that she was really very scared and couldn't contain the pain growing inside her. The idea of seeing her friend as an insector broke her heart, and Yoo-jin, observing the girl's lament, tried to say that everything was okay. And looking in the direction of Misong's desk, she was sure they could work through the situation. Meanwhile, in the construction building, the black ant devoured the insector cockroach it had taken down. But this time, the ants didn't discard their suits to feed, and each attack against the cockroach was made with an unusual veracity. Our protagonist waited for his sister's meal from afar, and while watching them do their work, he commented to himself that after consuming the larva, the ants had multiplied. He leaned against the wall and noticed that there was no way to contain them. Then, looking at the ants centered in the helmet of his suit replica, he had no choice after several attempts but to create his own colony of ants. The replica rose, still growling with hunger, and walked towards Misong, who, appearing calm, asked if they were okay. But the suit didn't seem well-trained and tried to attack our protagonist as it became aggressive when it still felt unsatisfied. Then Misong punched the replica, which disintegrated after the boy held the leader ant he had created to command the colony trapped in a transparent globe. He watched the artifact in his hand while the new sisters returned to the globe just like those that came back to his neck. But suddenly, his sense of danger was triggered, and a pair of feet stomped heavily in the area, creating a slight tremor. Misong clenched his fist and, without looking back, was sure that an insector was approaching. But in reality, there were three that revealed their silhouettes in front of a tunnel, and for Misong, that was the perfect opportunity to test his new powers. So he jumped from the top of the building, transforming again into a black ant, and he ran as fast as he could to confront the insectors, leaving dust behind, until this sense of danger activated again for something that was enveloped in dense smoke in the distance. Then he stopped a little away from the tunnel, certain that one of the enemies had disappeared. The ant gathered more energy and lay in wait near the entrance where the insectors were, until he heard a possible argument inside the tunnel where one of the insectors was cursing a certain Red. And inside, the monster with a horn in the middle of its forehead, facing another defeated one, realized they had been lured into a trap. This was confirmed by the insector named Red, who intended to eliminate the accomplices. The insector, whose name was Ladybug, known as Red, explained that he needed to de-stress and therefore called the lackeys for 5 minutes of fun. Then he readied himself for battle. The other punched the ground while releasing a violet gas. And revealing himself as a rhinoceros beetle known as Bala, he said that Ladybug was very confident just because they fought together in the lawless frontier arena. The creature thrust its horn forward and charged at Red with all its might. But the Ladybug dodged and commented that the big guy was very excited. However, Bala, despite crashing against the wall, did not give up and charged at Red again with his horn. But this time, Ladybug prepared to punch, judging the beetle's strategy to be somewhat foolish. And Bala, who didn't care about the concept of strategy, invested, promising to finish off his opponent. But Red delivered a blow to the beetle's stomach that bent his body with the impact. Thus, it took only one hit for Red to defeat the rhinoceros beetle. And while his fist dripped the purple liquid coming from the insector, Red looked back and called out to the one lurking near the tunnel entrance. Then our ant revealed itself and Red invited him to join the fun. Misong began to walk into the tunnel while concentrating his power, and after a few steps, he said he was ready. A bridge rose over that tunnel where our hero was challenged by Ladybug, and the tires that circulated there hardly knew that everything was about to collapse. While the insects studied each other in the famous silence that precedes the storm, Red Ladybug commented that the opponent was a bit scary and therefore wanted to know his name, but our ant did not utter a word, and the Ladybug insisted because she liked to know the names of those she was about to annihilate. Then, without wasting time, she threw a boxer-style punch at Ant's face and asked again for his name. But suddenly she realized that her blow hit a fake helmet of the suit, which was actually a replica of the ants created by Misong. The insect stepped back to avoid a counterattack from our hero, who remained motionless, and continued to study his opponent, presuming that he was an ant. It was then that after some internal scans of her mind, she concluded it was the black ant. Then our hero spoke for the first time and with a threatening air promised that this would be the last name that Ladybug would hear in her lifetime. Red let out a satisfied laugh and charged into the attack again, commenting that she knew the name Black Ant from the beating she had given Zigna recently. The insect threw another punch, saying he was eager for the fight, and as his fist approached Ant's face, he asked the opponent to give it his best. But our protagonist was much stronger and managed to dodge all the punches with a simple movement of his head. Red, who was unsuccessful in his attacks, withdrew his blows upon realizing that Ant was analyzing his movements. However, growing angrier, he ordered Misong to take that battle seriously and attacked again, but was surprised by another perfect dodge. He widened his eyes behind the helmet when he noticed our hero's counterattack movement. The black ant acted with such speed that it was almost impossible to see his fist. Red only had time to close his boxer guard, but knew a powerful punch was coming his way. And when he thought he could dodge even with his eyes closed, he got caught and felt the impact of that cross hammer at the height of his jaw. Red staggered, and if it weren't for the armor, he would have already been on the canvas counting. But the walls of that tunnel wouldn't hold for much longer, and an unsuspecting bus was almost in the cracks forming. The ant saw his opponent kneeling as the tunnel ceiling began to make noise. But for Red, his only concern was understanding how he received that punch, even knowing he could perceive any blow from a mile away. And while noticing his helmet cracking at the point of impact, he was sure that the power of Ant was beyond his expectations. Misong showed no sign of a guard position, and his imposing aura assured the enemy of how strong he was. Red then, realizing his inferiority against Ant, heard his opponent ask for his name, and Misong, determined, explained that he would like to know the name of the one he was about to annihilate. Ladybug felt offended by our protagonist's words and clenched her fists because she would not give up so easily, and the ant prepared his powerful punch to attack the enemy again. But this time the blow was stopped by a force field that Red conjured by uniting his fists. The fighters were measuring strength, and Ladybug felt she needed to use her power. So she let out a scream that invoked her reflective ray, and a force field between her and Ant gradually increased. There was an explosion, and Misong jumped back to defend himself. The bridge above the tunnel began to crack, posing a danger to the approaching bus, and when the concrete cracked completely, the driver had difficulty swerving. Then the bus headed towards the guardrail, while the fight between the insects continued at full speed. Black Ant was battling with Red, and the bus was already almost halfway off the road, and our hero looked up, noticing the imminent accident. Trying to kill two birds with one stone, Misong replicated his suit with the ants to maintain the fight and jumped back, which left Red somewhat indignant. The bus was falling, and the people inside were trying every way to hold on to survive. But the ant quickly held the bus to try to prevent disaster, and he cushioned the fall of the vehicle with the strength of his body as much as he could. Misong did everything to sustain that weight until he heard Red call him again. The insect observed our hero with his hands occupied and warned that those ants were not enough to stop him. Then he dropped the replica helmet on the ground and headed towards the original ant. And surprisingly, he began to help Misong support the weight of the bus, preventing it from falling. With the strength of the two working together, it was possible to place the bus on the ground without causing major harm to the civilians. People began to exit the vehicle, thanking for the help, but at the same time, they appeared frightened to realize they had been saved by insectoids. Civilians passing by kept their focus on Red and the black ant, who was also staring at the ladybug, studying her movements. The insect in Red then warned the one in the black suit not to get distracted in the middle of the fight. Then, clenching his fists like a boxer, he decided that the second round was about to begin. The ant, attentive to his opponent's movements, awaited the approach, and without difficulty, he dodged the enemy's strike with just one hand. Countering with his clawed hand, he declared that he was fed up with that nonsense. Red had his helmet shattered by the force of Misong's punch, and our protagonist then lifted his defeated opponent into the air, projecting the replica of the ants ready to devour him. His sisters advanced eagerly towards the next feast, but Misong noticed something that made him take the action of throwing the ladybug away. The fallen insect looked in the direction of the ant, trying to understand why he hadn't killed him, but our hero simply turned his back to walk away. And amidst the defeat, Red still gathered his last strength to shout in a threatening tone that he would crush the ant, but that was all. It was starting to get dark in the city, and Arajo was talking to her mother on the phone, saying she was exercising, but the woman didn't seem to believe her. She was next to her younger brother Asio, who told her that Era was looking for Sejin every day after class. On the other end, Arajo confirmed that she liked looking for Sejin, but at that moment, she was really exercising. The woman shouted so loudly on the phone that the girl had to pull it away from her ear, and after hearing her mother's worried lecture, she replied that she would go home. She hung up the phone, not believing that her younger brother had snitched on her, and she decided it would be better to go back home until someone asked, full of slang, what was happening. She looked back and saw a boy in a beanie who claimed to know as Sejin, but Arajo had no idea that he was the insect lion Yang Yo-chien. Then the boy, with his innocent look, asked if Sejin was her friend. Night fell quickly, and the boy led Arajo down a path surrounded by pines. She, somewhat suspicious, asked if Chien really knew where Sejin was, and the boy replied monotonously that he did. Ira wanted to know how they had met, and Chien pondered how he would lie about the answer. Then he said he was just a work friend, which made the girl curious. She wanted to know if the kid was a work colleague insect, and that left him perplexed. But the girl only wanted information about her friend, and the lion ant replied that Sejin was fine. He even mentioned the partnership they had every day with a certain mosquito. Arajo said nothing but found the mention of the mosquito strange and hoped her friend wasn't in trouble. Suddenly, she stopped in the middle of the path and informed him that she was going home because she didn't want to be a bother. And she commented that Sejin seemed to have a good friend now, but the boy scoffed at the compliment. He looked at Arajo with a dark expression and asked, "You said friend?" Then he commented that perhaps Arajo would judge him as somewhat of a villain, and the girl began to feel scared by that threatening tone. Chien explained that he was hungry, while something began to crawl behind him, and Arajo's eyes widened when the boy said he had led her there to feed. Suddenly, several larvae began to emerge in the dim light of the pines, and Chien commented excitedly that he could hardly wait to see Sejin's reaction. Arajo swallowed hard in despair, while Chien, controlling those larvae, felt ecstatic at the idea of Sejin discovering that he had eaten her friend. The girl stepped back, trying to understand what he meant, and Chien, with a serious expression, revealed that he had never liked Sejin, while recalling his journey in the insect world, working hard to survive by hunting humans, and fighting against other creatures to discover his true self as a lion ant. He showed envy towards Sejin because she had the gothic mosquito to protect her. Arajo was stunned, but Chien always struggled to understand the sudden reactions of humans. In a sudden thought of survival, Arajo took off running to escape, and Chien, without moving a muscle of concern, ironically asked where she was going. And as his transformation into a lion ant began to take over his body, he warned that it was too late to try to escape. Arajo tried to scream for help, but suddenly felt her body being sucked into the ground trap of that dangerous insect. The ant lion then gave the order for the feast, and the larvae advanced towards the girl who had no way to defend herself. Arajo just screamed, waiting for the first bite, but suddenly the heads of those larvae were swiftly severed, leaving Arajo momentarily relieved. For Yujin, the silk insect appeared hovering to save her. The antlion looked up curiously when he saw the insect approaching. Yujin made a spinning motion towards the monster, which barely had time to defend itself. Then Arajo felt herself being lifted by Yujin's threads. While the antlion asked who was messing up his hunt, our heroine placed the tip of her foot on her blue threads and replied that an unpleasant old man was calling her Silk while Arajo gazed at her savior. The girl felt the cords loosen around her body, and thus fell onto Silk's webs, not knowing what to do. Then the insect ordered Ara to flee from there, but the girl was frozen in place. Yojin was more specific and informed her that she needed to leave now. Arajo then thanked her and ran out of that pine forest, while Silk maintained a guard position, staring at the monster in front of her. The larvae that were still alive crawled over the cords towards the insect, but she quickly produced more threads from her fingers to attack the creatures, and wrapped them all with her 1,000 rings. Then, with a single movement, she shattered them all at once. Yojin heard the creature's grunts as her armor was stained with a purple liquid they released. Qian, already furious, wanted to know why Silk had appeared out of nowhere to disrupt his snack, and behind his multiple eyes he threatened to bury her alive. Yojin, who felt no effect from the intimidation, found the monster's tantrum rather cute, and in front of the pieces of the larvae she had destroyed, she revealed that she was listening to the entire conversation. Then she wanted to know if the antlion belonged to the insect court, and he, staring at her, answered dryly that yes. The insect, protecting itself in its ground trap, said it knew her from the beating she and Misidon gave Zigna, but asked if she could fight him alone. Yujin conceded her opponent's point and then took something that was stuck in her helmet, concluding that if she had to fight against a member of the insect court, she would be willing to use the larva she received at Club 6 Shot. The heroine hesitated while staring intently at the pill, and the antlion, noticing what she had in her hand, tried to encourage her not to do it. But Yujin seemed determined now and brought the pill to her mouth. The insect attacked Silk right after, intending to defeat her before the larva took effect. But as soon as Yujin swallowed the larva, a whirlwind of smoke occurred that prevented Qian from knowing what had actually happened. Then the antlion in defense mode deduced that he had exaggerated a bit in his concern over a single pill, but suddenly he felt his tentacles being cut by the bluish threads, and our heroine, much stronger, shot her 1,000 rings towards the enemy, who saw all his arms severed mercilessly. She couldn't believe that just one pill had given Silk so much power, and so Yujin warned that an imposter like the antlion who had been transformed into a larva would never understand. She let her aura reach its maximum and said that this was the true power of a genuine insect, evolving her form into Silk Wolf. The pine forest was attentive to the movements of Silk Wolf versus antlion. The insect's eyes shone like never before in the face of such power, and the lion narrated what a true insect was, and he was just a simple imposter. But our heroine, who wasn't in the mood for talk, resorted to violence and kicked the opponent in the head. He groaned in pain from the impact, and when he realized his limbs had left his body without warning, while Yujin awaited the dull thud of the enemy's defeat. But the lion fell on his feet and, trying to prove he was not an imposter, charged at Silk, warning that he was a larva. Then he opened his mouth and unleashed his fang tongue, which traveled fiercely towards Yujin's neck. For the first time in the battle, a monster felt he was in control. But Yujin stared at him serenely, as her entire body was covered by a dense layer of silk, and informed him that the fangs would not leave a scratch on her. Then she held the antlion's tongue, which widened its eyes upon realizing his own fragility. Silk began to squeeze it and promised to turn the enemy into pieces. Xian could not contain the strength of his opponent as he watched her shoot her, cutting threads that wrapped around his tongue completely. And suddenly he felt the muscle being torn from his mouth. The lion ant refused to believe he had lost his main weapons of defense and attack, and with his spinning movement he buried himself in his own trap, while Silk watched curiously with the creature's tongue in her hands. The insect was fleeing but promised he would return to finish the fight when he was stronger. Xian did not accept defeat and only thought about evolving. However, even underground he encountered Silk's bluish threads crossing and blocking his escape, and they tightened around him until he was reduced to pieces of rock. Yujin watched the debris of that creature hoisted by her web of threads, and she looked at her own fist, almost believing in her strength. Then she clenched it, feeling satisfied that she had managed to defeat a member of the insect court. But she knew her desire for revenge was just beginning, until she heard a familiar voice behind her inviting her to another insect mating. She looked back and saw those sharp blades ready for the second round. But it wasn't the second round with the lion ant, it was Zigna, who had just clocked in, thirsty for revenge. Art Insectora faced him with concern, knowing that the water spider was strong, especially without Miss Ong's presence to help her. But Silk was more powerful now, and being attentive to the enemy's movements, she had a glimmer of hope that she could face him alone. Zigna studied the girl and said he knew her, but he was intrigued by the absence of the black ant. He shared that since the infestation of ants from the last battle, he still felt something crawling inside him and promised to kill Mizone to rid himself of that sensation. Silk, who now had her blue threads also coming from her long hair, replied that she knew exactly how Zigna felt, and that's why she launched her energized locks against the insect, promising to help him escape that agony. Zigna, for his part, did not raise his guard as the thick threads approached and wished that our girl would give her best. Then swiftly he crossed his flaming blades and blocked the attacks of the embodied Insectora. But the thicker threads did not break this time, and when Zigna's blades began to crack under the pressure of the attack, the insect realized the effect that the pill ingested by Yujin had caused. Then the water spider saw his sword break and thought that any wrong move could end his life. But while the Insectora prepared her next attack, Zigna pulled his blade from his back and commented that her time was running out. He started counting down from 4 while blocking Silk's kick, but he felt the impact of a punch when he was thinking of 3. He was thrown back, not forgetting to count down to 2, and he saw his opponent advance as 1 ticked away. It was only then that he decided not to defend himself against the girl anymore. Yujin's eyes widened behind her visor when she heard the enemy inform her that time had run out. Then the girl fell to her knees as if fatigued, and she felt the thick threads of her hair diminish, just like the effect of her new power. Yujin realized that her wolf claws had also disappeared, ending her transformation. Then, with the insect's blade touching her neck, the girl heard Zigna explain that the effect of the pill had a time limit. However, the member of the insect court was not willing to kill her and ordered her to accompany him under custody. Meanwhile, far away in Mizong's apartment, the boy was watching TV with his grandmother, who had a news segment about Chiang Xiang, a featherweight boxer who was the Asian champion. The old woman, attentive to the interview, commented that the young man was the pride of Korea, but Miss Ong seemed to notice something strange about the athlete, who had not received a single blow from his opponent in the last title defense. And when the reporter asked how he got the bruise on his face, there was surprise at the revelation that Chaeyoung had faced an insect. Miss Ong and his grandmother watched the interview with the charismatic athlete attentively until the old woman decided to change the channel. Then came another news story about insects found in the mountains, and Miss Ong noticed his phone vibrating on the table. The boy picked up the device, which had a notification from Arjo asking if he was going to school the next morning. But Miss Ong was still learning to control the new colony of ants, so he decided to skip class for a few days. Arjo had sent several messages to our hero, and he discovered there that even Yoo-jin was not going to school either. The boy became worried about Yoo-jin and decided to send her a message, saving her contact as emergency food. Meanwhile, deep in the club, Six-Shot Nightclub, the trivial battle was taking place in the lawless frontier arena, where humans and insects vibrated together for entertainment. But that night was special because in the midst of the fight was our dear Silk Yoo-jin. She seemed to be becoming the main punching bag for the other fighters. And Zigna, who was watching the fight on a big screen, realized that Yoo-jin was the girl he had given the pill to a few nights ago. The insect continued watching until he noticed a vibration from the purse on the table next to him, which caught his attention. The man pulled out the cell phone it contained to read the notification on the screen. He felt satisfied to discover that Formiga was looking for his friend. At home, Misong was heading to his room and informed his grandmother that he wouldn't be going to school the next day, but the old woman didn't object to her grandson's decision. Then the young man's phone vibrated again, and he became curious as it could be a response from Yoo-jin. When he looked at the screen, he noticed that his emergency food had sent a photo. Misong tapped on the image, and what he saw sparked such perplexity that it even made his ants stir inside his body. Silk's helmet was shattered under the red card from Club Six-Shot. Outside the nightclub, the music was booming, indicating another night of excitement at the venue. Meanwhile, in a set of cells, someone was walking slowly, moving through the silence. Zigna stopped in front of the bars with a cold expression. He asked Yoo-jin, who was slumped inside, if she was okay, then informed her that her failure in the arena had left the bettors very upset. Our girl, all beaten up, simply asked the man to leave. But Zigna didn't listen and deduced that Yoo-jin only had one pill but couldn't help her because someone had stolen all the stock. The insect looked at the girl and sincerely said he felt a connection between them and wanted to know what she really wanted. Then Yoo-jin, keeping her head down due to the pain, replied that her goal was to eradicate the insects. Zigna appeared incredulous and asked why she acted like a reaper of insects while denying her insect nature. The man leaned over the bars and told her that he spared the girl's life because all insects were relatives and had a special bond. Yoo-jin lifted her head and glared at the man with anger, then heard him say that the next fight was about to start and ordered her to be ready. And as Zigna left the block of cells, he informed her that he had prepared a special fight for our heroine. The break in the arena came to an end, and suddenly an insect leg entered the venue. The creature, which had the face of an alien, announced to the audience through a microphone that he had news that night. Everyone present cheered when he informed them that the hellish race was about to begin. The presenter, who was actually a stick insect, explained that the battle would have 10 competitors fighting to the death and only one would emerge victorious. His name was Zaza, and he soon signaled for the aggression to begin. Yoo-jin walked down the corridor towards the arena while the stick insect made his proper introduction. He welcomed Silk, who had an expression of hatred on her face that had never been seen on the girl before. The audience looked at the clock, which marked 60 seconds, while the announcer continued explaining the rules for the hellish race. Yoo-jin seemed small in front of the crowd and listened attentively that she would have 1 minute to defeat her opponent, and after that time, more fighters would enter the arena. And within a reserve sector, several insects awaited their moment to demonstrate their brutality. Then Zaza introduced the second fighter, who without hesitation flew swiftly towards Silk, and the girl, without any fear, awaited the creature's approach. The cells of the other fighters were open, and Red was warming up his body with repeated punches into the air. Zigna observed the competitor and asked if he wasn't going to prepare for the fight. The ladybug stared at the boss when informed that he was the 10th to enter the arena and questioned why Zigna wanted him in that show of losers. He suggested that he be placed with the others as the star of the night, but for Zigna, that would be a shot in the foot since the fighter would quickly take out everyone. Red threw a punch towards Zigna, who didn't flinch when he noticed the fighter intentionally freeze his hand just inches from his face. The fighter seemed displeased and stated that he would like to face Zigna in the arena or even Daejin, the brute. Zigna felt his blood boil at Red's threat, especially when it came to the boss of the whole operation. He spoke, almost letting his transformation happen, that perhaps he should teach the fighter some manners, which he promptly liked. Then Zigna's phone rang, breaking the tension of that imminent power struggle. The man answered the device, and an employee informed him that they were having problems. Zigna, worried, wanted to know what was happening, and the man on the other end of the line told him that something was wrong with the VIP elevator, where a large black hole had formed in its place and the clients no longer had access. After hanging up the phone, Zigna called Red for a mission, and looking at him with a plan in mind, he warned that the fighter would face a real opponent. Meanwhile, in the arena, the presenter was impressed with Silk, who had already taken down her 4th consecutive opponent. But the girl felt fatigue and knelt down, exactly at the moment when her next opponent would be Queen Zack, an insectoid that Yoo-jin knew well. The monstrous creature then let out her war cry, which made the entire arena tremble. And if it weren't for Silk's skill, the girl would now be crushed under the stomp of the enormous creature. Yoo-jin screamed after escaping the attack, but she wasn't quick enough to stop Zach's hand, which hit her as if a mountain were falling on her back. Then Yujin spun in the air until she touched the ground, feeling as if her ribs had been broken. To make matters worse, another insectoid foot began to stomp in the arena. Two more opponents were coming for Silk, and Zaza concluded over the microphone that things were not going well for our heroine. For the 6th, 7th, and 8th opponents were together in the arena, a place where there was no justice, only a lawless frontier. In ecstasy, the presenter announced that the climax was about to begin while Silk, almost unconscious, was surrounded by the other opponents. The clock marked the end of another cycle and restarted the countdown at 60 seconds, leaving even Zaza worried. But the presenter maintained his composure and announced that this was a bad moment for Silk, as another creature was about to enter the fight, and the darkness coming from the main gate announced the fear of the next fighter. Zaza began to welcome the newcomer when a horned head emerged from the shadows. Then he shouted that the 9th fighter was coming, but suddenly the purple blood of that creature painted the darkness, and its head rolled like a soccer ball while an insectoid leg that we know well touched the bloody ground, crushing the helmet of insect number 9 and thus taking its position for the fun. Zaza was about to announce the name of the fighter that was in his script, but this time he couldn't even improvise. The replica of Ant was devouring before everyone the insect that had just been taken down while Misong walked triumphantly to the sound of "Who are you?" Zigna, who noticed the commotion, ran to the window and felt excited to realize that Ant had bitten his bait. Yojin, who was surrounded by the creatures, raised her torso upon seeing the silhouette of the new opponent in the distance, and even faint, she murmured hopefully the name of our hero. Zaza almost had a fit when he realized that Ant was an unauthorized fighter, and he lunged in front of Mizong, preventing his participation. But our boy told the presenter to shut up while the colony forming his helmet grew stronger. Then he pointed his arm with the helmet towards Zaza and fired without hesitation a kind of ray, which the presenter tried to block with his spinning blades. But he screamed in agony when he felt his body melting completely. Mizong interrupted the attack, and the ant head in his hand resembled a shield of noble knights from medieval times. His imposing presence was notable, as was his cutting voice that ordered just once to hand over Yujin to him. The timer marking the entry of the fighters was destroyed by Mizong, and while they ordered them to hand over Yujin, he fired another ball of lightning that shot out from the mouth of his shield helmet. The luminous sphere headed towards the fighters, who could barely move with the attack. Then it exploded one of the creatures, almost leaving Yujin exposed, who protected her face. The girl, now almost standing, judged Mizong to be an idiot, and while she observed the destroyed creature, she wondered when he had acquired such skill. She looked in the direction of the boy and asked if he also wanted to hit her. However, Mizong stopped the attack and faced Yujin with his neutral expression. And while the girl commented that she was also there in the middle, an orange blade overlapped her neck. Yujin's eyes widened in surprise at the stealth of the one wielding the sword. And suddenly, Zigna was above her, wearing a pleased expression at the reunion with Mizong. Our protagonist's eyes trembled, but without showing real concern, he pointed his laser pistol helmet at the water spider insect. Zigna stared at our hero, waiting to see if he would have the courage to shoot with Yujin so close to his own body. Then Mizong hesitated while trying to come up with a plan. It was the perfect cue for Zigna to order his minions to attack Ant. The creatures advanced with all their strength against our hero. Upon seeing their approach, he put on his other helmet but thought that this fight would be a waste of time. Mizong unleashed another rain of lightning against the fighters, and one of them felt the luminous glow consume him completely, and held his position with his new weapon in hand, until Zack stepped forward, letting out his war cry. The ant fired his rays again at the grotesque creature, and suddenly Zack grabbed one of the fighters and threw him in the direction of the ant. The insect collided with Mizong's shot, while Zack joined his hands for a frontal hammer attack. The ant only had time to look at the monster's hands coming from above, when everything seemed to collapse with the thunderous impact caused by Queen Zack's blow. Zigna felt proud of his fighter's action and made a point to comment to a worried Yujin that the ant should still be alive. The creature had caught Mizong in its hands, and so Zigna ordered her to take him to him. But suddenly Zack fell, and the water spider watched the scene, unsure of what happened. It was then that the insect woman began to have her face melted and suddenly exploded as if a bomb had been introduced into her insides. Zigna, this time, became worried as the black ant emerged unscathed from the thick smoke. The insect noticed that our protagonist was more powerful and assumed he must have consumed one of the pills, while Yujin cheered for the ant's victory. There was silence in the stands, followed by murmurs and doubts about who was arriving to end the party. Then the ant said once again, determined, "Hand her over to me," and continued that Yujin was his emergency food, leaving the girl somewhat dismayed by the explanation. Zigna expressed a devilish look at the boy and ironically commented on how he found the ant hilarious until a voice emerged, interrupting his judgment. A rather upset human customer asked what would happen to the money since everyone was dead. Then the others supported that voice, wanting answers about their bets. Zigna felt the hatred and disgust for humans rise through his veins. But he turned to the customers and informed them that on behalf of the company, everyone would be reimbursed. Then he bellowed for them to shut up and place their bets again. The crowd was stunned, and the man who complained about the money asked if Zigna and the ant were going to fight. Misong liked the idea and responded loudly that he would wipe out the insect court member. Then Zigna, with blood in his eyes, asked the ant to give it his best. However, he commented that our hero's opponent was behind him and welcomed the 10th competitor as his feet revealed themselves in the arena. The ant looked to the side, facing the opponent who had arrived, greeting those present. Red entered the arena, stretching as if he were stepping into a boxing ring. The ant then asked if this was the place for the rematch, and Red confirmed, already excited about the possibility. The ladybug set her boxing guard and charged at the ant with full force, and our hero prepared his defense until he saw him change the attack's trajectory and pass by him like a bull, landing a punch on Zigna's face as if that were his true target. The impact was so great that the man released Yujin and flew backward with his face already deformed, but he quickly regained his composure and leaned on his orange blades. Zigna became furious with the betrayal and cursed Red while wiping his mouth. That was not part of any premeditated plan, and Misong wanted to know why the boxer had attacked his own boss. Red looked back and explained that he had observed everything from above and found the ant's attitude honorable. Then he asked Misong and Yujin to leave, as he was moved by their friendship and would take on the fight, even calling the boy his friend. Both the ant and Silk found that perspective somewhat exaggerated, but Misong put Yujin on his shoulder and began to run. The girl tried to contest how she was being carried, but the ant paid little attention to her outburst. Zigna, who was already wearing his armor, did not interrupt our hero's escape but told Red that he was fed up with serving as his babysitter. And the ladybug ironically replied that the insect was doing a great job, but it was time to die. The two stared at each other, determined to fight to the end in the lawless frontier. Meanwhile, in the midst of the escape, Yujin asked if Misong had also gotten the VIP card to enter the arena, but the ant replied that he had not. Then he explained that he destroyed everything right away, and the girl was left speechless by the boy's rudeness. It was when she saw the big hole that the ant had dug where the huge elevator used to be. But since she was quite exhausted, she just wanted to get out of there quickly. Misong started to climb the place but felt some rocks hit his head, and he noticed a rapid movement of rocks coming from above. Suddenly, the hulking boss descended into the hole like a bulldozer with his fists raised. Our hero only realized it when he felt the blow to his face. The villain's hand was bigger than Misong's face, and it took just one hit to smash his helmet completely. Yojin's eyes widened when she realized that the first impact was just because the owner of the place was claiming his rights over the vandalism. Where's the lawyer? Then he stood up in front of our protagonist and said he would have to kill him, but the most impressive thing was the size of the guy, who looked like an enraged titan. The club's bass was booming on the dance floor. Meanwhile, in the VIP area, the champagne was flowing beautifully down a dry throat. It was Daejun, who was there having fun as he did every night in his pleasure refuge. His expression of happiness had a name, the larva Suyang defeated before him. He stared at the monster the boy had become after swallowing 50 pills and felt excited as if he were in front of a grilled steak. Until one of the women beside him, drooling over the meal, asked if he knew anything about the creature. Daejun casually looked at the woman and asked if she was afraid he wanted that trump card on the table. The woman commented that it might be wise to warn him, but the hulking man thought she didn't seem very convincing given how she was drooling over the larva. Daejun then held the larva and, looking determinedly at the banquet, informed that Kinjuno wouldn't need that because he was much stronger than all of them combined. And so he shouted that he was dying to experience all that power while bringing his teeth closer to the yellow juicy steak. But suddenly there was a loud crash that even knocked plaster off the ceiling. Daejun froze at the situation until a little worker ant rushed into his room out of breath to inform him that there was an intruder in the club. The boss, with the larva in hand, asked if the intruder was strong, and the insect warned that he had only destroyed the elevator and was heading for the lawless border, that was all. Daejun dropped the larva, indignant at the interruption, and he pointed his finger in the worker's face, questioning if he should handle the problem himself. The butler trembled at the boss's threatening tone and begged him not to harm him for his incompetence in handling the mess. Daejun poked the worker's forehead with his finger, and the insect fell without having time to feel pain. Then the boss decided he would join the party before savoring his new meal. Back in the hole, Misong was being strangled by Daejun's hand while Yujin watched in horror at the strength of that enemy. The guy had a dark, unfeeling expression that radiated through the rocks surrounding them. And seeing him lift our ant made Yojin remember feeling such fear only in Kijuma's presence when he killed her parents. Still dazed, Misong heard the giant say he wouldn't charge for the damages caused to the elevator. But he felt another blow like a stone hitting his stomach while Daejun was genuinely enjoying himself. Stunned, the girl saw Misong pass by her side and blend into the wall behind him, all battered, and felt that it would be her turn next. However, another wind came from her shoulder, and when she looked back, she realized that Daejun ignored her and delivered a knee strike to the ant without mercy. The hulking man kicked our hero and shouted for him to react. But every blow felt by Misong seemed to leave him incapacitated to fight, and Daejun, despite turning the ant into a punching bag, appeared dissatisfied with the boy's lack of reaction. He was so obsessed with demonstrating strength to our protagonist that he didn't notice when the little black dots of Misong's power began to appear. and suddenly the replica formed by the new colony of ants attacked the hulking man from behind, delivering a punch to Daejun's face, who didn't even have time to see where the blow came from. The replica simply intertwined with the boss's arm, who was still trying to understand what this new type of attack was against him. But Daejun didn't feel intimidated and even made a joke, finding the colony cute while preparing his counterattack. However, before his arm could reach the black ant replica, his blow was halted by the blue webs of silk. The girl tried to use all of her strength to immobilize the giant while our protagonist was incapacitated, and realizing that the guy was already strong even in human form, she knew her ropes wouldn't hold him for long. Daejun found himself attacked from both fronts and found it interesting how the hero had protection. He felt excited as he sought a battle that made it worthwhile to step out of his comfort zone and take action. Yeojin tried to resist in every way with his webs alongside the colony of ants that were voraciously attacking the enemy. The brute laughed at his opponents, encouraging them to give their best while letting power flow through his being. There was a roar so loud that it couldn't be determined whether it came from the nightclub or the battles being fought in the heart of that place. In the arena, Red remained steadfast in his purpose with his armor covered in the blood of the insect, and Zigna, who had just taken a hit, heard his opponent sing victory before the time. But the water spider, despite having his armor nearly destroyed, would not give in so easily. He felt his anger rise when Red asked him to get up. The fighter approached Zigna and said he didn't hit his opponents while they were down. Suddenly, a hole opened in the wall of the arena behind the insects. Black Ant and Silk flew in as if they had been thrown into the place by an extreme force. Then Red looked back and saw those he had sent fleeing return to the lawless frontier. Our heroes were standing, but their faces showed the shock at Daejun's infernal nature. It was then that Zigna's eyes widened hopefully upon hearing the boss calling his name. The guy entered with an imposing presence that could scare anyone and sarcastically remarked that Zigna looked terrible from all the beating he had taken. Zigna showed great respect for the man, and when he tried to apologize for his failure, he was interrupted by the furious boss, who told him to shut up for not being able to stand weak justifications for his subordinates anymore. Zigna remained kneeling and obeyed his superior's orders, while Red seemed somewhat cautious about Daejun's presence in the area. The audience was incredulous at the arrival of the man and began to murmur about how tall he was since they had never seen him in person. Daejun waved to the still gaping customers due to his attire and the beating he was giving to an unstoppable ant from the previous fight. The boss then simply crossed his arms and, commenting that he was hungry, asked if our heroes had already eaten. As if none of that had happened, Daejun informed them that they were his guests and thus decided to prepare a feast. The man called for Zigna and ordered him to be the first to eat, but the insect stammered at Daejun's order and was interrupted again under the dark gaze of contestation. Then Zigna, not wanting to challenge the boss's authority, jumped, which was closely observed by Red. The ceiling made an electronic noise and began to open slowly. Our heroes looked up, curious about what might emerge from there. Then something fell from the opening at high speed. Yeojin couldn't take his eyes off the object in continuous motion, trying to understand what was coming in their direction. Mizong, with a stunned expression, seemed to identify the contents of the package. A human was falling freely as if absorbed in a deep sleep. There was a dull thud as the body hit the arena floor, producing a thick cloud of dust. Daejun took a few steps forward and said that the guests didn't need to feel embarrassed, and the human who had just fallen began to transform into a disgusting larva with its repetitive grunts. But that scene seemed normal to the boss, who assured how delicious that larva was. Red was outraged by what he had just seen and even cursed Daejun out of disgust with the situation. Then suddenly, it began to rain humans transforming into larvae through the opening in the ceiling. And as they splattered on the ground, Daejun devoured them shamelessly as if he were at a buffet. Our heroes remained motionless with expressions of discontent in the face of all those creatures. But Daejun savored every piece while inviting everyone to the feast. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tob's channel.